Skyrim, A Sorcerer's Tale by Rastislav. Chapter 431, Side Story 1, Merish Marshalling. General POV, a day before the army of Dagoth set out to Morrowind. Davos sighed contentedly as he strolled through one of the now inhabited parts of the once-forgotten Vale. Work was getting done at a breakneck pace, with hundreds of mer migrating to the rumoured Promised Land every month, and the city had expanded beyond its initial boundaries months ago. Humans were also welcome, but there was a silent agreement between most people of both kinds that this was a place for elves first. Not that the Nords did not have other places to settle, as much of Skyrim had been burned by the dragons, and great swathes of land were now ownerless. Shaking those dark thoughts away, the right hand of Dagoth, a title growing more prominent by the day to his great consternation and his wife's amusement, gave one final glance to the section of the valley given to the few dozen snow giants to inhabit. The rowdy fuckers had finally calmed down after he called their drinking buddy to visit them, and they begrudgingly accepted that the noise would be a constant. "We'll need to find a more permanent solution, though," he thought with some annoyance, and promptly shoved the problem for whenever his boss would return. He was a killer webweaver, damn it, not a bloody leader. Davos stopped in his tracks and sighed before chuckling to himself. Who am I even kidding? He had long since lost that choice, and he wouldn't have it any other way. A shame, but he had been cooped up for too long, and he preferred dealing with a massive Argonian invasion to spending any more time pretending to be something he was not. Inevitably, he found his way to his most recent haunt, the Lightbringers Corner Club. The city's most prestigious place of respite grew deathly silent as he entered, some of the more eager mer within standing up to greet him, until he rose a silent hand and bid them to sit down. They listened this time, thankfully. The proprietor, an ancient Dunmer woman named Wildred, greeted him with a motherly smile. "Running from your wife again, kid?" No one bothered reacting to her sharp tongue. It was a fact of life. The sun rose every day, and Wildred was an annoying old shrew. Rolling his eyes, Davos shook his head. "Just taking a short break. Is anyone in yet?" "Just Varmir," she answered as she wiped a mug squeaky clean. "Came in a few minutes back." Having climbed up a masterfully engraved wooden staircase, he closed the door behind him and was greeted with the stocky sight of Varmir, the master of the great foundry, Davos. The gruff smith greeted him. He gave the mer a lazy wave and took a seat. "You got everything done?" "A few orders had to be rushed." The smith scowled, being a perfectionist at heart. "Had to throw the work at the apprentices, but it is mostly tent shingles and chainmail, so they shouldn't have fucked it up too much." "You are too hard on them," Davos commented. "Let the kids live a little. They may as well use the chance we never got." The smith scowled. "We only have the chance because of pure dumb luck." Shaking his head, he went on, "Can't rely on Lord Raven to deal with everything for us, and equipping our protectors properly is as much a matter of survival as it is one of honor." "Won't hear me disagreeing." Davos rose his hands in faux surrender before sighing, "Guess I still feel a bit bitter about it all." "Bah," the smith scoffs. "You aren't in the quarter anymore, kid. You have a future to work towards, so stop living in the bloody past before I smack you in your dumb head." Before Davos could respond, the door behind them opened, and in walked a quartet of figures, the first one being Wildred carrying their orders, while the other three were Karsus, the chief steward, followed by Maren and Varen, the two commanders of the sworn mer. "Gentlemen," Lord Dagoth's left hand greeted them and took a seat, the two commanders doing so as well, though much more quietly. Wildred left them without a word, knowing there was a time and place for her usual comments. Karsus Davos nodded. "Still have bags under your eyes, I see." The elf chuckled at that. "The newest batch of clerks are finishing their training soon, so don't worry. I will get some rest." He pauses and sighs. "Probably." The steward scoffs. "Just because the two of you found yourself a pair of twins doesn't mean you get to hold it over the rest of us." He looked around for support, but found none. Varmir was happily married with 3 grown-up kids, and outright gave a disapproving look to the similarly aged mer, while Davos's decades-honed self-preservation instincts told him to not make a singular comment. Seeing he was beaten, the steward grumbled and took a sip of his drink. An act the rest followed with differing levels of smug satisfaction. The drink they were all partaking of? Tea. He must never know. Davos shivered. Man. Maren spoke up with a contented sigh. If only Oren could see us now. Varen pretends to scoff, but the sudden melancholy overtakes him as well. We can always summon him. You know that is not the same. His older brother shakes his head, and that is all he gets to do before a silent thud makes most of them flinch as they all spin to the new arrival, having snuck up on all but Davos as she carelessly plopped her ass on one of the free seats. Janassa, Davos greeted her in a slightly stilted tone. How nice of you to join us. The pleasure is as always, all yours. The still youthful-looking centurial killer that pretty much raised him grins with teeth showing. Varmir scoffs, what do you want, woman? Oh? She smirks. Am I not allowed to be here, dear Varmir? The smith grumbles to himself about troublesome women and returns to his drink. You have to admit you rarely show yourself, Karsus points out. What with young Alor being away and Adrasa never bothering to show it is usually just the five of us. He gives Davos a quick look. He didn't even bother mentioning the ever-serious Nightshade or her potential presence. Fools just didn't understand her is all Davos had to think on that. As if the children want to spend time with us old relics. The woman smirks, but no, I did not come back to drink the grass juice you all so enjoy. Q grumbles, I just returned from meeting with the Morrowind branch. All of them turn completely serious as Karsus leans in, and? She just shrugs. Didn't take any effort to convince them, really, what with the webweaver herself showing up and outright ordering the Grandmaster to do as he is told. The two commanders, the smith and the steward gawk. Davos snorts, yeah, that sounds like her. Unwilling to open that deathly can of worms, Karsus tentatively speaks up. So would it be safe to say Lord Dagoth has their full support? Full support, Janassa mimics him before snorting. Most of them would slit their own throats at his command just to get a chance of pleasing her. A few of them blanch, while the smith made a point of ignoring the conversation and focused on the crowd below. Good news aside, Janassa keeps her grin as she looks to the two commanders. How goes the betting pool for today? The constant military exercises in the form of team battles had become something of a sport within the house, and where sports went followed bets. The crowds of citizens would thus gather whenever free to observe the eternal honing of their defenders, something all of them enjoyed. The two brothers immediately brightened up, having earned a mighty sum of septims by leading the two competing forces, and the talks descended into one of the most entertaining parts of living within Silrun Fell. Sadly, even as the banter descended into increasingly unimportant topics, and Davos began to truly relax, the doors behind them opened for the dozenth time, but this time instead of Wildred in came the veiled form of Agent Beetle. My lord, the woman purred, the mistress invites you to join her in the tower. Already? Davos grumbled inwardly and got up after only a second's pause. Karliah pulled an actual whip from her belt and struck the nearby wall, making the sound as crisp as unreasonably possible. Davos flipped her off and went home with a smile. A small Dunmer girl dressed in miniature robes rushes through the northernmost of the three residential districts of Silrun Fell. Its distinct white marble look, dotted with numerous flower gardens, easily setting it apart from the rest of the city as the place where the most wealthy dwelled. Slow down, child, you will not miss anything. Beetle jogged after her, her voice carrying amusement instead of the expected exasperation. Irene completely ignored her and kept moving, too eager to see the army set out. You know we could have just looked at them from the tower, Beetle points out. Having caught up with ease, the mistress could have made them look closer too. The little girl finally turned to her and crossed her arms. No, I want to see them up close. Even as she kept up her innocent mask, she inwardly wondered how powerful it would feel to have an army of her own. Hiding her smile, Beetle sighed. Well, at least you told her. I am a responsible girl, Irene proclaimed proudly and turned to run once again. Now come on, they will be starting soon. A minute or so later they found their way onto one of the seemingly empty houses. The young thief turned mage, not caring one bit, before she levitated the both of them to the house's grand balcony that should give them a perfect view of everything. Only for the girl to still completely and Beetle to each for her dagger, as they learned the house was not abandoned in the least. Really should have checked which house it was first, damn it all, the woman cursed inwardly. A Dunmer wearing high-quality green clothes of Nord Make looked up at them lazily, though Beetle could see his eyes scanning them rapidly. "Is there any reason you have invaded my property?" Terran the Unmailed, as he was known, drawled out. Irene, seemingly having forgotten her previous fear, eagerly pointed at the rows upon rows of armored mer. "We came here to see the soldiers." She said happily, "Can we stay for a bit, please?" Beetle almost chuckled at how manipulative the little hellion could be, and she taught her all of it. Terran was so very tempted to tell them to fuck right off, but the girl's sparkling purple eyes made it too difficult for him to be his usual cuntish self. So all he did was huff and wave his hand to a pair of free seats. "Do as you will, but once they are done, leave and don't come back." Beetle chose to stand behind the young one, much to the retired champion's amusement. Now fully focused on the sight, Irene feels her eyes widening with awe. So many elves gathered in one place, so many of them more powerful than the Windhelm guards that once tormented her. Hundreds upon hundreds of them, all neatly stacked into rows and standing perfectly still, unmoved by the cheering of the crowd. And of course, the unofficial guardian of the city was present as well. The great Krynar Vokun lounged atop Tel Dagoth as he too observed his liege's forces readying for a glorious march. "To have a dragon loyal to you?" the girl thought in awe. The cheering slowed down and finally died down as a trio of figures walked out of the great tower, two mer in full-plate armor, styled in the same way as their fellow soldiers, only covered in sashes, cloaks, and plumes, easily designating them as the two commanders. But the third elf is the one Irene was truly there to see, and Fart Davos looked quite powerful in his own right, as he led the small procession with assured steps, his helm held under his arm, and his master-crafted armor glinting in the sun. The entire square went completely silent as he turned to face the army, his eyes seemingly looking for something as he nodded to himself. "Brothers and sisters." He spoke as one of the nearby Falmer cast a spell on him, making his voice spread so all could hear. Listening to him rehearsing the same speech 100 times last night was quite funny to the young girl. "Our Lord has given us sanctuary and prosperity when none bothered to care. He has protected us and nurtured us, and even slew a god for us." As he spoke, murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. "It is time to pay back that debt." Davos went on. "Our kin in Morrowind are under attack by the Argonians once again, and it is our liege who stands against them even now." Everyone knew this for a fact, and yet excitement and fury still spread. "And we will not betray him by staying out of this fight." The right hand declared, "We will show our kin of old Morrowind the true might of House Dagoth, and show them the truth of his vision." The troops stomped their weapons. His voice quieted as he shook his head. "And that is enough of that." He chuckles to himself. "We have been preparing for this long enough. It is time to spill some damn lizard blood." And at this, all the soldiers let out a clipped but loud cheer. Davos turned around, momentarily pausing as his eyes met distant Irene's, and without acknowledging her further, he looked east. "Soldiers, march!" As one they began moving down the square and into a portal that shimmered into existence. Absently, Irene remembered hearing her mother say how it was all for show and the portal was actually connected to the room below the tower itself. She just took it as an elaborate illusion, which made perfect sense to her. Just a big courage spell, really. A bit short, but he could have done worse. Their host chuckles to himself as the army slowly begins disappearing. Good little crowd pleaser for a gutter rat, though. "You take that back." Irene rounds on him and points her finger at his face. Part of it was the act, and part of it was true annoyance. Terrian just rolls his eyes. "Don't take it too seriously, kid. Just an old mer rambling." "You do sound old." She raises her nose and huffs. "You got spunk, child. I will give you that." He smirks and turns back to the square. "Still, aren't you a bit arrogant to go around insulting people willy-nilly? Not afraid someone will stab you?" Her entire expression shifts into a cold look then and there. "Afraid?" she asks in a flat voice. "You'd just get burned to a crisp." The old elf's eye twitches as he suppresses a shiver and mutters, "What the fuck do they feed the kids in that tower, and where can I get some?" Having heard him completely, Irene giggled. "You are funny." He gives her a dumbfounded look. "Right. Come now, Irene." Beetle cuts in, while giving Terrian a pointed look, something the retired elf could only shrug his shoulders at. "We should go back." "Fiend." The little girl grumbles and begins levitating them. "See you later, funny old man." Terrian stares at a literal 10-year-old levitating two entire persons for a long moment, before promptly shaking his head, picking up a bottle of mead and downing the whole thing. This is why he decided to retire. It was some 10 minutes later that Irene was led to Nightshade's chambers, and she found the woman she considered her new mother standing atop her balcony in silence and watching the now empty quarter. Irene Nightshade spoke with a tone the girl couldn't quite place. "Had fun?" "I did," the girl muttered, "but I feel really sad now." The Falmer gently placed a hand on her shoulder and brought her up next to her. "Feeling sad is fine. We have done all we could to prepare, so all we can do now is do our own jobs while hoping they return to us whole. I still think they shouldn't waste time helping the idiots in Morrowind." The girl couldn't help but mutter, "They didn't help us when we needed it." Nightshade sighs. "It is more complex than that, child. Besides, Lord Dagoth gave the command." And that was that. The two remained silent, staring at the now empty square for a while before their silence was broken by little Varador, who chose this as a perfect moment to wake up and begin wailing loudly. As Nightshade went back inside with a motherly smile, Irene once more thanked the stars for that chance encounter she had all those years ago, and prayed to them that the kind mare who saved her and gave her her new family would be safe. Chapter 432. Chapter 51. Vardenfell. General POV. Viren Indoril had been having a rather stressful time of it for a few days now, ever since the head of his house got himself strangled to death under a fully valid honourable writ of execution. And in most cases, that would have been that corrupt and incompetent nobles were removed often enough for everyone to accept it as a fact of life, except for the added fact that the heads of a great house could only ever be written off by the Grand Master of the Morag Tong, someone who answered only to the webweaver herself. Add to that the knowledge that the root spire was enchanted beyond the capability of mortals to ensure peaceful cooperation under the auspices of the good Daedra, and, well, the reactions of his priestly kin were rather ambivalent to say the least. This was one of the rare times saying, "the gods willed it," about someone's death was unironically correct, was something Lord Dagoth commented at a later meeting held within the Redoran Palace. Not that any of the Indoril entertained the thought of striking back at him, as open a secret it was that it was he who petitioned for the writ. Doing so would have been spitting in the face of the webweaver and thousands of years of tradition that and not a one of them would survive the attempt. The bold young lord had developed something of a reputation in the time Varin had spent at his side. A rather expected outcome to most, yes, but the form said reputation took was a rather odd one if the young priest said so himself. One day, just after the conclave, one of his priestly brothers was found speaking of sun and shade, a name he had no source of save for a hunch that had been bothering him ever since he beheld the young elf, and soon the duality of his deeds became widely known, as he would protect the righteous and punish the undeserving with an almost arrogant prejudice. The bearer of said reputation made no comment on its spread, leaving the people to do as they willed. As for Varin himself, well, to say that he, the only person among them to have spent more than a few days and scarce short meetings around Lord Dagoth in recent times, was accosted by every single member of his house with enough influence to demand his time, would be the understatement of the year. Each scrambling faction wanted an understanding of the Lord of the Sixth House, and apparently he was the poor fool destined to answer inane question after inane question. A part of him felt lucky that he genuinely did not have most of the answers they desired, as all of them tried and failed to call his bluffs with their numerous lie-scrying heirlooms. They refused to leave him still, but at least he managed to get a good idea of the developing power struggle, being split into three factions, with the main branch wanting to retain influence as Neramir's son promised swift reform and a return to dutiful piety. A branch house decried the main house's failings. and a third faction under the Almalexian descendant Alandro, who united the ambitious youth and the disillusioned into a more radical power bloc aimed at proactive reform and with the goal of fixing the homeland so that the gods and ancestors may smile upon our work. Virene doubted the unfortunate child of the false would achieve much, but he still wished him luck all the same, their recent battle-born camaraderie more than enough for the young priest to ignore his prejudices. He had seen far too many leaders attempting to hold on to the status quo only to fall apart the moment trouble came in recent times, and change sounded nice to his mind. That, though, was the sole thing keeping him from pulling his hair out, however, as his superiors in the house just wouldn't stop pestering him. Why, had he been unfortunate enough to be born a human, he'd have no doubt developed the grey hair of their elders by now. Which is exactly why the moment Lord Dagoth declared his intent to leave the city on the third day after the conclave, Virene immediately volunteered to keep following him. Even the hellhole that Vardenfell had become sounded better than one more meeting with his demanding kinsman. Raven's point of view. The rhythmic rowing of the galley sailors striking the waves with their oars was the only noise currently trying and miserably failing to distract me from the sight before me. And here I thought the mainland was fucked, I scoff. I did warn you to expect it. Savos hums next to me, poorly hiding his own distress. It used to be only slightly better than the mainland before the eruption, you know. Kind of impressive how the Ashlanders are still getting by now that it is 10 times worse. Stubbornness will do that to a mere, I shrug. That or skill and grit. The mildly amused voice of Masur of the Erebenimson draws our collective gaze as he and his brother approach, their priestly minder electing to stay below deck, as he did not take to the water all that well. I lean onto the nearby wooden railing and quirk an eyebrow. Something you two need? Indeed. Massanor speaks up now, his previously insolent tone replaced with one of grudging respect. We should be reaching Gnesis within the hour, and... He pauses, gives me a worried glance, but quickly steels himself and goes on. We sent a message to the Ashkans of your coming, and the Urshilaku have requested that we meet them. Urshilaku, I mutter the name, the mystics of your collective lot, no? He looks like he wants to be offended by what he no doubt considers a generalization, but exposure had taught him to keep his mouth shut. Yes, he affirms clippedly, their wise women are known for their sight and ability to commune with the good Daedra. I immediately roll my eyes and mutter under my breath, can't just fucking send me a vision directly, can you? Rising my voice to actually be heard, I go on, I don't mind making a slight detour, some additional information on the lay of the land would be nice. The taller brother nods and trots away, his younger counterpart staying behind and once more giving me a hesitant look. You truly plan on calming the mountain, don't you? My eyebrow raises, still filled with doubt, are we? He shakes his head. After what I've seen you do? No. He looks back to the shore now visible under the constant ash wind. Still seems far-fetched, though. Well, in that case, I stand up from the railing and stretch a bit, popping my bones unnecessarily, merely follow and observe. He grunts an affirmative and walks off. Savos looks at him leave and comments, I was always amazed by the Ashlanders, even if they can be. Mildly barbaric, I ask with amusement. I was going to say a bit simplistic. Savos snorts, but sure, barbaric works as well. Our conversation trails off as Gnesis finally comes into view, the admittedly majestic, fiery backdrop of distant Red Mountain still guzzling burning smoke into the skies that then fell down from the central mountain range of the island of Vardenfell, not doing much to conceal just how very dead the once city looked. Of the once grand trading dockyard, only one pier remained intact, no doubt repaired over and over again at immense cost so that the once city and now mere supply hub could remain functional for the few fleets of ships still willing to brave these waters. The captain of the galley that Sindral graciously lent me shouts out for the rowers to begin slowing down, and soon the ship finds itself fully docked, even as the ever-present turbulence of the inner sea kept on attempting to topple or damage it. You are certain you don't want us to wait for you? The tall captain asks, quite scared by the concept, but more than willing to do the duty assigned to him. But I had no reasonable need of his services. I do not know how long we will be spending here, and I doubt your crew would appreciate the posting. Do not worry about us and relay my gratitude to your lady." The elf waits a moment in case I change my mind, offers a deep bow, and returns to discussing trade with the few local Redoran subjects too stubborn to leave. I return to my group, made up of Anandor, Akulakan, Savos, Virin, and the two Ashlanders, and the moment I approach Massanor speaks up. "The Urshilaku. Ashkan left a message for us. He and his kin have set up a camp at Uld Velothi to the northeast. We should be able to reach it within the day if we do not dally." "Excellent." I clap my hands and begin walking in said direction before pausing and turning around. "Well, gentlemen, what are we waiting for?" I will admit that when I stepped onto Vardenfell, I expected to be graced with the incredibly alien sights I once saw within a game, but all I got instead was ash. Ash, and you guessed it, more ash. 2 centuries of constant volcanic eruption had not done these lands many favors, and it was only now beginning to sink in. When I whipped out my wind cloak and cleared the air, clearing out a large chunk of road and revealing the once unique landscape below, I found the 2 Ashlanders, who until now looked at me with respect for my martial prowess, now staring at me with eyes that bordered on teary reverence. Part of me was "It's sad the shorter one would forever keep his previous cheekiness to himself, but I suppose it was a worthy sacrifice for some clean air." A decision that quickly proved itself to be the correct one, as I soon stumbled upon a ball-shaped chunk of rock glowing with crisscrossed red cracks that practically radiated power. A very familiar power. I had to hold myself back as my instincts roared at me to swallow the heartstone as quickly as I was able. Ignoring abundant evidence to the opposite, I was more than capable of practicing basic self-control, so I handed the sinfully tempting rock to Akulakan, focused my mind on the road ahead. There were plans in the making for those rocks, and I would not lose them to a dead god's hunger. And so it was that we marched in silence, leaving behind a trail of cleared land that was already slowly being reclaimed by the ash storms, and 10 hours passed. Just as I was about to summon my orb to kill time, we came upon a series of sudden jagged outcroppings of stone, nestled within which stood a warded camp, a spot of normalcy in the sea of apathy that was the rest of the great island. I did not know boredom made me feel poetic. The lookouts, understandably lax in their duties, took a moment to notice a massive ball of normal approaching their camp, but soon an alarm was raised, and a group of some 50 warriors had formed up within the protected edge of their camp. They all visibly relaxed as they realized it was Dunmer that approached, and not whatever else they thought threatened their lives. We strode through the wards, and an ancient-looking Dunmer woman took one look at the 2 Erebanimson tribesmen to know our purpose here. The wise woman strode forward with purpose, ignoring both her tribesmen and my own companions, to meet my eyes with a pair that held more insight than one usually found in a priest. "So your coming was no falsity." She speaks in a tone I found slightly difficult to identify as part wistful and part assured. How odd it is to look now upon the descendant of the one Nerevar himself sought to end, and hope he too shall bring salvation. She lets out a long, tired sigh. The gods will do as they will. It is up to Mer to follow, as it has always been. "Met Nerevar himself, have you?" I quirk an eyebrow. This woman was sending all kinds of signals my way, and even if not truly threatening in any way, I still found myself cautious around her. The chosen Hortator is as he has been, free to keep his comings and goings to himself. The cheeky little shit answers without a single shift of expression. What he is not is duty-bound by the 3 to do their bidding and bring succor to his people once more. Yes, I wave her off. Needless self-reassurances are fun and all, but is there a rest stop between here and whatever Azura told you to tell me? Finally, her demeanor cracks for a split second, and her lip twitches into a tiny frown before she writes it back up. "Your family's site is yet renowned in the legends, even if it has been misused for so long." She states, "However, you do not see all." Rolling my oh-so-venerable eyes, I drawl, "Do enlighten me then, you old crone." She sniffs in disapproval. "Very well." The air around her shifts. "Hear, pilgrim, the tribunal's sacred word. Seek you the house of the heart, and the source of our greatest woe, to pierce the veil set by the eternal foe. Bar the way does the house of troubles, their spite, their rage, and their maddened grumbles. Ask their aid, assuage their troubles, or turn their homes into righteous crumbles. 4 keys shall open the way, and bring to the land a bright new day. All the elves surrounding me, up to and including Savos, were completely silent as the words were spoken. Azura may have been willing to skip the song and dance within my own vision, but it would seem she was not quite so willing to remove her air of mystery before her usual worshippers. Not that I cared, since the task instruction was rather obvious, but I still did find it a bit funny. Say, wise woman. I speak up, my tone still completely relaxed. Her eyes flicker with power that was not her own before returning to normal. Yes? I give her a smug ass grin. What is the closest troubled shrine? Excellent. I clap my hands and turn to my companions, only to find, to my annoyance, that all of them looked exhausted as all hell. Sighing, I turn back to the crone. Your tribe wouldn't be against providing a bit of hospitality, would it? Her annoyed expression changes into one of odd familiarity. All who seek succor in these troubled times will be given aid. I just hope you do not abuse it. Rolling my eyes, I snap my fingers, summoning a crate full of preserved foodstuffs. Her eyes widen and she offers me a genuine smile. I believe the Ashkan will want to meet you now. Nodding along, I begin following her, only to notice a peculiar elf out of the corner of my eye. I had never met him, but he felt oddly familiar. How very curious. General POV. He observed them as they approached the encampment, only ever moving his actual eyes from his current customer as the Mer herself turned to see what the commotion was about. So that is what he wanted. He was unsure if he wanted to curse the one who sent him here or thank him. He supposed he would find out soon enough. His Ashkan, as he chose to call himself now, had sent him north under the pretense of orichalcum trade so that he may bear witness to something. It was all frustratingly vague and made him want to break something, but he was not foolish enough to gainsay his father's orders. Once was far, far more than enough. And so he gathered 3 of his kinsmen and made the trek to the north and west, trading with the lesser tribes of the land for supplies and information for 2 whole weeks before finally meeting up with the Urshilaku and getting the permission to stay a while. They were acceptable hosts, if one took their means into account anyway. Still, he keenly focused his sight at the newcomers and was immediately awed by what he saw. To so brazenly wear 6th House heraldry and to enter an Ashlander tribe with head held high. He shook his head at the mere thought of it and observed the short meeting, having to hold back a sneer of disgust as the wise woman preached the ways of her gods and demanded that someone far beyond her bow to her whims. Only the amused humoring of the preacher kept him from scoffing loudly, as he found the reaction rather apt to the ants prattling. Still, he would have to find a way to approach things, as the situation was resolving itself rather swiftly, and missing an opportunity like this one would be beyond shameful. He would just have to. In an instant, a gaze focused on him. The power behind it was of such magnificent depth that he found his own a pale imitation, something he knew to be a fact, yet only now truly understood. And yet, no actual attention was paid to him, as the group marched his stall by and headed to the Ashkan's tent, no doubt to explain the commotion and stop the bellicose elf from rallying the entire tribe for no reason. He waited for the appropriate amount of time for his customers to disperse and quickly packed up his stall, his kinsmen following after him as he made for their collective tent. The moment all of them gathered, the atmosphere inside became tense. "You have all seen it," he said. "The sole woman of their number scoffs, accuse us of blindness, why don't you?" "Shut it, Azra." A thin yet tall elf next to her growls, "We have more important things to consider than your constant complaints." Their strongly built comrade steps in between them. "Peace, please." He raises his hand slightly in placation and looks to the thin one. "What are your thoughts, Vemris?" Taking the simple out, the thin elf scowls. "What is there to think, Kralor? We have all seen him and felt his presence. To delay a meeting any further would be an insult to the ancestors of the highest order. And yet it would also be imprudent to reveal ourselves too quickly." The leader finally spoke. Azra visibly held back another sarcastic retort, but still managed an eye roll. There is caution, and then there is cowardice, Ulthis. Besides, Kraylor rumbles, we've all felt his gaze, pretending otherwise would be as impertinent as Vemris said. Hesitantly, Ulthis agreed with their assessment. Yes. And you still hesitate. Vemris drawls, though, is careful to keep the true mockery from his tone. What should we do then, O glorious leader? That the zealous elf even bothered to remain instead of running out to meet his perceived destiny said more about his loyalty than anything ever could. Kraylor's open palm smacks into the thin elf's back, nearly bowling him over as his larger kinsman gave him a long look. Ulthis, on the other hand, simply sighed, things are moving far too quickly for me to make an informed decision. The thoughts of what could happen kept playing in his mind as scenario after dreadful scenario made itself apparent. Come now, my friend. Kraylor approaches him and grabs his shoulder reassuringly. You may be young yet, but you are not so weak as to be scared by mere awkwardness. The cutting bluntness of Kralor's choice of words did much to bring him out of his stupor. The very well-hidden accusation held within took all of his choice. Yes. He nodded hesitantly. Such cowardice is unbecoming. Best face the music now instead of prolonging it needless. Before he could finish the sentence, all of them felt a shift in the air and rounded to the tent's entrance, only to still completely as they beheld a massive behemoth clad in ebony, its glowing purple eyes staring at them with disdainful judgment for a long moment before it simply pointed a thumb at the way it came. My master bids you to attend him. Raven's point of view. To think the lizards would strike at us once again. The powerfully built Ashkan sighs as I finish recounting the tale of Kraganmore. I told you once before, the wise woman cuts in from close by. Slavery always was and always will be an abomination. Practicing it always invites the destroyer's gaze without fail. Tapping the sturdy table I was seated at, I hum along in agreement. I find myself in agreement, though my reasoning goes beyond Mehrunes' hissy fits. The air around me crackles with cruel amusement, though only I and the crone notice it. Oh, the Ashkan, one Abasel Urshamusa, looks at me with interest. And why else would slavery punish itself? Dear Rawia here has been rather insistent it only ever had to do with the destroyer's aspect of rebellion. And this is where I, totally not as an act of petty revenge for having to listen to about hunting techniques for 2 whole arse hours, descend into a presentation about the societal and economic implications of slavery and why it was almost universally a shit choice in the long run. Let us just say that by the time I was done, the Ashkan looked like I had just drained his soul out of him, and the wise woman was humming along happily, even as she drifted off into a tided old woman nap. Oh my, it would seem I have gotten a bit too invested into the tale. I smirk at the poor elf. He winces but is still obligated to be a polite host. No, no, your insights are invaluable. I am certain of it. Grinning internally, I shake my head. I understand that people may not share interests, so how about we both return to the topic that truly matters? He hesitates for a moment, but nods. Indeed, your request was a rather demanding one. But if you hold to your promise of supplies, I see no reason not to summon the others. I am a mer of my word. I raise a theatrical hand. I assure you that should the tribes agree to meet at Aldrune, I will ensure none of you starve throughout the winter, and possibly even beyond. Rawia the wise woman's eyes narrow at that, her gaze attempting uselessly to pierce the information from within me. The Ashkan was far less enthused by what he suspected were simply empty promises, and we shared some more pleasantries before I excused myself from the tired duo, ostensibly so that both parties could rest up and enjoy a moment's peace. My true intentions were to answer Junior's call, now that his task was done. Savos and the Erebenimson had long since left the great yurt, the warriors to spar and my grandfather to meditate on a question I had posed him, while Indaril remained within, eager to speak to the wise woman to the point of willingly weathering her scathing looks. And so, more than satisfied with the results, I left the tent followed closely by a silent Anondor, the snow elf almost as uncomfortable with this island as Scorch was, and speaking of the dreaded birdman. Still feeling like the place is trying to suffocate you? I ask him as I summon him atop my shoulder. He stays silent for a bit longer than usual, his eyes staring into the constant ash storms outside the wards I discreetly empowered. I used to like Sheo, you know, he chirps, but now I am not so sure. I wouldn't blame him for it, honestly. I say, it was Vivek who kept his giant fuck you rock floating above his city for hundreds of years, just so he could blackmail his followers into worshipping him further. Too bad the little bitch is hiding somewhere. Scorch's voice turns dark. I wonder how his eyes would taste. You really need to get that ocular fixation checked. I snort, but I do agree he is in for a stabbing if we ever meet him. Treats are treats. He immediately denies before quickly adding, especially when sparkly. Just because your featherless ass doesn't have taste doesn't mean the rest of us need to suffer. Before our conversation could devolve further, we reached our destination within a hidden alcove at the edge of the campsite, completely obscured from sight and perfect for some light questioning. Questioning that would seemingly take no true effort if the postures of the four mildly terrified elves surrounding Akulakan were anything to go by. However, the moment I stepped into the small alcove, the four immediately zeroed in on me, all of their faces carrying an odd mix of awe and reverence, tinged with a lot of fear and hesitance. Ah, so that is what this was about. Before I could even make one God's-damned comment on the unexpected revelation, all four of them practically threw themselves onto the ground in prostration, and I am not talking a low bow here, but a full-on fucking forehead to dirt. Honest to Dagoth kowtow, feeling a sudden throbbing throughout the entirety of my head, something supposed to be a physical impossibility at this point. All I could do in response was pinch the bridge of my nose and hold back a groan. Dagoth Ulthis did not dare raise his head as he felt the judgment of his god upon his shoulders, none of his companions so much as twitching either, and as the silence protracted, even breathing begun, feeling like an insult. The mere thought of delaying this meeting now felt like the greatest of sins, as the faint traces of the divine disease inherited from their ancestors practically sang into their ears, promising greatness and ascension as a mother would sing a lullaby. A long, tired sigh finally cut through the tension. Rise. The Lord spoke, and they all did, though Vemris looked particularly hesitant. Even as they refused to meet his eyes, he spoke still, Junior. Were they like this when you found them? What? Had they insulted him in some way? No, my master. The oddly named giant spoke. It seems proximity is a factor. At least the creature knew its place. Is there something wrong with these Mer, my lord? The brightly armored warrior behind the master of their existence, they seem off. Yes, their lord and master answered, and all of them felt a pit in their stomach. Dear old Vorin seems to have had a thing for control. How entirely unsurprising. The corpus within roiled at the implication the words carried, and the four felt their whole beings begin to shudder as the contradiction attempted to resolve itself. Something that needs fixing post-haste, it would seem. The Dagoth said, and suddenly a force descended upon the word, unnatural grey flame surrounding all of them in an instant and striking at the disease, not banishing it, but instead removing all influence that was not their own. In a singular instant, all of their minds returned to them. Well then, all four members of the tribe unmourned, posing as Ashlanders, looked up and met a pair of glowing red eyes, accompanied by an expression of pure amusement. How about we try that again? Part of Ulthis felt tempted to throw himself to the ground once more, a fact he would take to the grave. Raven's point of view. The four Dunmer look stricken as I pose my question, understandably shaken by having their entire being scrambled by dear old grandfather's bullshit. And yet I still found myself annoyed with how long they were taking to compose themselves, too embarrassed to answer a simple question. The apparent leader jolts awake from his stupor and quickly shakes his head, lowering his gaze in the process. Apologies, your lordship, I do not know what just happened. Unsurprising, why would the puppet need to see its strings? Pointing at him, I say, something within you reacted to my presence. I have my suspicions, but you no doubt know more than I. He shares a quick look with his fellows and offers a hesitant answer. It could only be the divine disease. Traces of it remain within our bloodlines, even if our ancestors were cured upon. He suddenly stops, but as he sees my expression not change one bit, he goes on, "Upon your own divine ancestor's death." Awfully certain of who I am, I mutter. It made sense, but it was never a bad idea to get confirmation. The leader chuckles a bit bitterly. Even without the reaction of the corporus, your gaze alone tells us enough. Seeing my still raised brow, he explains, there was a reason our ancestors did not go through a full cleansing. All those infected. His thin companion sneers, with it gain a lesser version of your lordship's sight. Not completely surprising, I shrug, would be worth the risk considering the bloodline was meant to die with Vorin. Vorin? The thin one mutters, his brows furrowed. You'd know him as Dagoth Ur, the name he chose when he decided to play God. I tell him bluntly, awfully unsurprising that you are made to be unaware of the past. As soon as I say that, their expressions shift into a mix of disbelief, alarm, and even some concealed anger in the case of the evident zealot. You, the thin one speaks in a hoarse tone, you go against your sacred ancestors' path. I give him a long look, one he tries to meet, but quickly finds himself looking away. I am my own Mer, and frankly I have already achieved and will achieve far more than Ur could in his madness. Oh boy, can I practically taste their outrage in the air. They are smart enough not to talk back about it. Which just means they focused all of that confusion inwards and are currently in the process of questioning their lives. Useful, alarmed and confused as the quartet were, they still remained absolutely reverent in my presence. The indoctrination went deep, and it would take a fair bit of re-education to get the entire remnant I suspect existed properly civilized, if they did join me, that is. Scorch directed his strongest disappointed deadpan stare at me yet. Am I to assume you're fellow remnants? I quirk an eyebrow and ignore the bird's eternal sass, wish to reaffirm their allegiance. They share a look and the leader answers for them. Our fellow tribesmen are currently posing as a hidden Ashlander tribe, the Dar-Hashin. He pauses and looks away. I doubt they would deny you seeing how our own blood reacted. Rolling my eyes, I immediately wave off his unspoken concern. I have no desire to rule mindless puppets and witless zealots. All of you will have the compulsions removed from you, allegiance or not. It is the least I can give you to undo Vorin's apparent fuck-up. They all gape at me like I had just grown a second head, and it is the woman that speaks up first, though not before letting out an ironic chuckle. Most Mer would jump at the opportunity to have a tribe eternally loyal to them, yet here we are, denied. Ah, finally. Someone not deathly serious. I grin at the sarcastic Mer and shrug. Most Mer cannot rend a city asunder at will, she huffs, and how powerful could your tribe even be? I doubt your numbers are all that high. Pausing with the obvious bait, I add, also introduce yourselves already. I know my presence is stunning, but there is no need to be impolite. Q winces and sputters for a good 20 seconds before the leader says, I am Dagoth Ulthis. He points at the thin one, Dagoth Vemris, then at the big one, Dagoth Kralor, and finally the woman, Dagoth Azra. Adopted into the family through sharing corpus then. Not a bad way to create a fanatical collective, I suppose. And I, in the embarrassing case you were unaware of it, am Dagoth Raven. I grin and offer a theatrical bow, near knocking poor Vemrin on his arse with the gesture. The rest of my current followers will introduce themselves later if you do end up following me. Now my question. All this looks like he wants to ask something, but holds back. The current tribe is around 1,500 strong the last time we checked, all of the adults at least competent in combat, and a good number of us in magic as well. Indeed. He nods and once more hesitates, my lord. Remaining silent, I wait for him to ask the question. But he keeps staring off, long enough for Azra to clap him on the shoulder while rolling her eyes. He wants to ask if you already remade the house. Poor boy is afraid we got replaced without knowing. She sounds like she is joking, but there is a tension in her voice most would not notice. Real uninformed, are we? I raise an eyebrow. Not much news reaches us this deep into Vardenfell. Kralor speaks up for the first time, quickly adding a respectful my lord. At the end. Well, now that is just sad. I have indeed remade the house in Skyrim. I answer simply, you and yours are of course welcome to join me, but do not expect me to abandon my city for a ruined fortress. Vemris stills and mouths, city. Ulvis nods, trying to hide his defeated expression, as is to be expected, of course. I doubt our leader would say no, but the decision still lies with him in the end. He pauses. As for us four, we would be honored to accompany you in whatever you wish to accomplish on Vardenfell and beyond. His three companions do not hesitate in making their agreement known. For all the snark and cruel revelation I slammed them with, their faith would make it almost impossible to stop them from metaphorically, this time throwing themselves at my feet. Excellent. I clap my hands and grin. Do follow along then, we may as well continue this chat of ours away from the constant winds. We spent the rest of the day catching up, as it were, with them explaining to me the structure of their tribe. It was pretty much a dictatorship with a minorly influential council, and how they managed to survive so deep into the hellhole that was Vardenfell. Short answer, the absolute mad bastards stole every single Quama colony they could get their grubby little hands on and made it look like they died because of the foul air, pretty much securing their food supply for the next half a dozen centuries if nothing went wrong. Admittedly a cunt move, but when it came to feeding one's family, I'd have probably done something even more heinous if I was in their position. True hunger was not a feeling I would ever be able to forget. Not that one ever should. On to less grim thoughts. Once Anandor was goaded into removing his helmet by Azra, he was immediately blasted with question after question. He tried answering them patiently at first, but after 20 minutes of brutal childish thoughtlessness, even his patience was beginning to fray. The thought of Anandor, of all people, smacking people into shutting the hell up amused me to no end. But alas, I was a merciful liege, and soon informed them of just what and who the Falmer was, which led into me talking about restoring the race and undoing the crimes of the Dwemer, an act that merely served to reaffirm the quartet's belief in my divinity. Unwilling to bear that awkwardness, I kept the tale going, inevitably ending up at the founding of Silrun Fell and my growing dominion. So, Kralo begins, how big is this city of light exactly? The army I raised from it is 4,000 strong. I answered with a deservedly smug grin. It did not take a genius to realize just how ridiculous that statement was. The fighters of a city were usually a tiny fraction of the population, and even with my own admittedly skewed ratio of just around a sixth, yes, the benefits were that good, it was still a frightening number, which naturally meant that I had more professional soldiers in my employ than they had people in their whole tribe. It was quite sad watching the realization enter their eyes. As did determination, apparently. The four of them did not need to share a word before collectively deciding they would prove themselves worthy of serving me. It was almost endearing, honestly. If I were to equate them to lost puppies barking up their long-lost owner's legs, that is... Fuck, that was dark. Good thing I didn't mention the militia course all citizens went through for a small cut in taxes. That would just be cruel at this point. The Ashlanders were incredible sticklers for tradition, and for a tribe to be based on lies hit them quite hard. They did not try anything, though, as in the end even traditionalists and zealots learned to shut their mouths before true power. Viren was completely silent, not having much to comment, while Savos just shrugged the whole thing off and said it was to be expected. Vardenfell is a rather large place after all. The following morning, we once more met up with the leadership of the Urshilaku, and were sent off with a small feast, or at least what the Ashlanders considered a feast anyway. I am not saying Quama and Sujama were a bad combination per se, but without my gift, it would have literally been the only thing they offered. At this point, I was growing genuinely sympathetic to their efforts and aspirations. We made gestures of friendship, held a short spar where I pretended to struggle before handily bodying the poor mare, and left with a final promise to meet once more in Aldruin once my pilgrimage was complete. Our wandering dozen left the tribe with great fanfare, and soon we were back to the wasteland that was modern-day Vardenfell. The unmourned, I wasn't calling them Dagoth in my mind, that would be far too confusing, were at first concerned by our lack of ash-storm-worthy clothing, but soon found that traveling with yours truly meant traveling in style as the ash parted before me like a certain sea did before a lesser man. Their expressions when they realized I could keep the ash at bay permanently were quite the treat, I have to say. And it was thus that we made our way north. Our destination? The great temple of Asunabitashpi, dedicated to Mehrunes Dagon. A fucking mouthful is what it was. The land around the ancient Velothi temple was jagged and sharp, looking more like a sea of spikes instead of a simple rocky outcropping it was meant to be. The few round towers still standing against the storms of ash barely visible in the distance, even to eyes far beyond the normal. The whole thing somehow looked both angular and angleless at the same time. It was trippy. How very devious. Savos comments as we pass the massive spikes by one wrong step, and the unfortunate pilgrim gets impaled, given just enough time to realize their agony before their bodies give out. Dagon does represent the dangers of the land, so the decor made sense at least. I shrug. Seeking Mehrunes out without being prepared is just asking to get stabbed. Is it not only fools and the desperate that seek the house of troubles? Dagoth Vemris posits, his rough black robes bound tightly to his limbs so as to not drag him with the wind. No mere of character seeks the false gods, especially not those universally known to be malicious. Veyrin, clad in far greater robes, yet about 20 times less comfortable, gives the thin Mer a scathing look. Even your lord does not insult the good Daedra. What makes you think you have that right? Before the two could descend into yet another verbal spar, people got really bored when traveling, go figure. I raise a hand. Veyrin, you will find that speaking for me is not your right. The priest winces and bows his head. And Vemris, as delightful as your dedication is, insulting beings of power, gods or not, is just asking to draw their gaze. He tilts his head. Of course, my lord. His left lip twitches upwards. One should not poke a sleeping troll after all. I guess that is the best I'm getting out of you. I scoff with amusement. Soon we find ourselves walking up crumbling stone stairs and are met with doors widely open, revealing a scene of ordered chaos within. The rooms were not organized in any particular order, and the reliefs and statues carried distinct signs of all eras in history, and some from even beyond that. Though one universal aspect of it all was the oddly upbeat feeling in the air. I mutter, and the moment my voice rings out, the atmosphere in the chamber, one bearing a massive empty throne, shifts, revealing a projection of Mehrunes Dagon himself. The destructive Daedra stared at me with approving eyes, his slightly changed form looking less warlike than usual as he rested his head on one of his many hands. Another rested upon the throne, while the remaining two leaned on a pair of weapons. How oddly fulfilling to know I did that. We meet once again. Mehrunes' voice rings out, "Little Aedra." General POV. Dagoth Ulthis was not having a good day today. In fact, he would go so far as to say he was having the worst day in his life. First, they enter a Daedric temple without a care. Then the very Daedra drags all of them into a vision, and now, this. We meet once again. The Daedra spoke in an amused, gravely voice, "Little Aedra." Naturally, things only got worse once Ulthis's mind caught up to what was just said. The tension in the room growing massively as all the Mer present, beyond the odd snow elf and the archmage, had their very wordle views shaken. It was all broken in an instant as Lord Dagoth struck his face with an open palm. Raven's point of view. Really? I deadpan at Dagon. What? It is technically true. The once destroyer's lip twitched slightly. The best kind of true, I finish for him with a long sigh, accepting the impeccable logic. Has anyone ever told you you are a massive cunt? Everyone around me tenses. They thought it. Mehrunes answers nonchalantly. Usually they are too afraid to say it, however. How very boring. I drawl and he nods. Anyway, is there an actual reason you chose to drag all of them here, or were you just looking to fuck with me? The latter. He answers without a second's pause, one of the unmourned outright choking at the lack of care. Your beloved webweaver keeps telling me it is very fun. I find myself in agreement. Now it is Veyrin's turn to have a crisis of faith. Of course she does. I pinch the bridge of my nose. He leans in slightly, his presence growing more weighty by the moment. Now, what is your purpose in this temple? I need to enter Red Mountain, and you and your 3 colleagues seem to be blocking the way. I answer without bothering to mince words. Do not associate me with those fools. Dagon growls, out of all of them, only Malakath is not worthy of outright scorn, and that is only because he draws my pity instead. His eyes scan the crowd before ending up on Vayreen. Just because the Dunmer need to label everything so they can feel like they know things, does not mean those same things will change by their whims. He leans back and ever so slightly smirks. Just because I disdain them does not mean I will reject a favor owed. Fair enough, I roll my eyes. So you going to open the way, or do I need to pose threateningly for a few minutes first? As entertaining as the attempt would be, he drawls back, I only need my curiosity satisfied this time. What is your plan with the mountain? I cup my chin and let out a light hum. Why don't you wait and see? Favor, he says simply, which meant he was obligated to actually protect Vardenfell from straight-up blowing up. Huh. I assure you it will be nothing negative. I grin at him. In fact, I would go so far as to say your work here will be quite thoroughly done by the time I am finished. Always a delight working with you, Lord Dagon. I offer him a respectful bow and pause. Say, you wouldn't happen to know anything about a certain rebel in Skingrad blowing people up with some distinct destructive magic? Of course I know of him. The Daedra answers simply, though I see the amusement hidden in his eyes. He was my cultist after all. Rather pointless to give someone so near death your blessing. I comment, why bother at all? Because he was rather devout in his own foolish way. Dagon explains languidly, but just because he has proven worthy of my blessing did not mean he was strong enough to use it. We Daedra are not simply power to be used, and he learned that lesson the hard way. It takes me only a moment to decipher his actual meaning as I deadpan, so you did it because you found it entertaining. He grins a terrifying grin, yes. Of course, I sigh. The Daedra smirks at me as the vision begins retracting. I will be watching, Dagoth. I grin. Trust me, Dagon, the show will be more than worth it. The moment our silent group stepped out of the temple, its odd atmosphere retracted, and I felt the air around the others grow heavy. The 2 Ashlanders looked traumatized, and while the taller one merely stared into the distance, his younger brother sat and leaned against one of the great stone spikes and began shivering while muttering half-audible prayers. The unmourned looked just as shocked, though all of them at least had the presence of mind to only remain silent while dealing with their world views being violently twisted mere moments prior. Viren Indaril felt like he was panicking, but his eyes were narrowed with incredible focus as he pulled out a large book and began scribbling down the whole meeting. He'd probably go up a rank or 3 in his house if he brought that back to Necrom. Good on him for snatching the opportunity, I suppose. Anandor and Akulakan remained completely stoic, feeling like rocks in the storm of emotion, one because of millennia of experience and the other because of a general lack of fear. I give him a faux look of confusion. What? I just went in and had a nice chat. Went far better this time as well. He didn't even try cutting me in half. Savos blanches. He did what? Rolling my eyes, I approach him and pat his shoulder reassuringly. Oh, don't worry about it. We only need to go through 3 more similar situations. As I speak, my hand worms to his neck and I effortlessly pull out the necklace hidden below his robes. Also a bit hypocritical, no? His eyes narrow for a moment before he huffs. Just be careful with them. One mistake is usually all you can make. Yeah, I sigh. He wasn't wrong. I just operated on an entirely different level than what even he knew. He stares at me as I begin walking to the other Dunmer, shaking them awake and snapping my fingers in front of their vacant eyes. Why do I feel things are only going to get worse? I hear him mutter. Pretty good intuition there, Gramps. Before we left the temple, I felt a distant gaze flicker in for only the slightest moment, but before I could follow it to its source, it was cloaked in innumerable subtle layers that would take days to unveil. Someone was watching us, and all I could glean was that they were related to neither myself nor the Daedra. Mile after mile through the momentarily cleansed ash we marched, pausing only to take meals from time to time and to pick up any heartstones we came upon, my instinct to consume them only growing with their quantity. Good thing Akulakan held them and was positioned to the rear of our formation while I stood at the front. Even if I doubted I would at any point fall to the temptation, it was never a bad idea to make sure. It was only a day or so later that we arrived at Vardenfell's western reaches. Our journey drastically sped up with magic to both clear a path and rejuvenate the tired, and soon we found our way to the encampment of the Ahamusa Ashlanders. Their camp, lacking in the powerful magi that the Urshilaku had, was not graced with a powerful ward, and was instead positioned to Vardenfell's harsh western cliffside, the old tribe of hunters and fisherfolk barely getting by through their ancient trade as the seas roiled without ceasing. At first I pretended to simply accept their invitation, but once I saw with my own eyes that they were not at all bluffing about it, I summoned a veritable feast for them, all of it in the form of easily storable food that they could keep for a long time. We left their encampment the next morning, the cliffside settlement remaining much the same, except if one were to take a good look at their fishing boats, all of which now sported lightly glowing runes at the bottom of their hulls. They would not suffer nearly as many accidents at sea until my work was done. Our next destination, as directed by the Ashkan Rassidor, was a temple to Malakath to our south. It was no ancient edifice, but a small camp housing a single Orsimer who came there months ago and made contact with the Ahamusa tribe by trading his kills of the local monstrosities spawned by the often magical storm. They were mostly akin to ice atronachs in form and function, but were instead made of ash, and while they were mildly interesting to me, they took the vast majority of Savo's interest as we travelled. With how energetic he looked all of a sudden, I wouldn't be surprised if he came up with a spell to both summon and bind the creatures within a few days. Something I was more than happy to leave to him, as summons were never truly my forte. Back to the Orc, an elder warrior if the Ashlanders' information was correct, he currently resided in one of the numerous abandoned Kwama mines, and spent most of his time either hunting or carving a shrine to his god-king by hand. The closest thing the Orcs will ever get to a monk, I suppose. He was a bald mer, all of his hair seemingly going to his impressive groin-length beard, the sea of hair seemingly never ending as he stood up to greet us. There was no surprise in his eyes, only acceptance and eagerness. "So you finally come." He spoke in a gruff voice akin to grinding stones. "You were expecting me?" I quirk an eyebrow. His gaze loses focus for a brief moment, but he quickly gathers himself. "I am old." He says simply, the sheer gravitas in his voice telling more of a story than his words ever could. "My body weakens, and my death comes." "So you have come here to seek it?" I ask. I knew how these things usually went for his kind. They would only ever reach their afterlife if they died fighting, and the only elder orc I haven't seen looking for death was Urag Groshub, and that was probably because he was too powerful to be worried about an afterlife in general. "Yes." He gives another short answer. "Malakath promised me glory if I came here. You will give it to me." The moment the name was spoken, the Daedra in question directed his gaze here. "I see." I mutter after a moment of consideration and wave my hand, removing my armor and robes and summoning a simple shirt and pants in their place. The old orc had no weapons of his own, and I was feeling oddly generous today. Well, that and I knew how these things went when it came to honorable gods. He grinned as he saw me not arming myself and took a stance, all of my followers swiftly directed by Savos to step away unless they wanted to offend a Daedra in their own right. Only Anondor hesitated long enough for me to give him a nod. The orc grinned and didn't waste any more time, rushing at me with berserk madness, already suffusing his eyes, not even bothering to wince as I slapped his initial punch away and proving his resilience by not simply loosing the entire arm then and there. He did not slow down. In fact, he even sped up as he used the twisting momentum of my strike to shift his weight forward and spin into a heel kick aimed at the side of my head. The orc was incredibly strong, quick, and tough, for a mortal, that is. With an almost lazy grace, I flowed around the strike, appearing behind the now unbalanced warrior and kicking his other foot from under him and slamming him into the ground with a rapid downwards punch. He grunted and jumped up, once more ready to throw down. Once more he tried striking me, and once more I simply dodged around him, breaking every bone in his left arm with a kick of my own and throwing him away, making him tumble and almost skid through the ashen ground. He spat on the ground with a grin and got up. In his berserk rage, he managed to throw a punch with his supposedly useless arm, but that only ended up breaking his shoulder further as I slapped it away, my other hand taking the chance to come down on his other shoulder as he was forcefully leaned forward. That he did not get his neck broken through the sheer shockwave genuinely impressed me, even as his face was buried once more in the ashen soil. The orc gurgled an uproarious laugh and threw himself up once more. He danced around me, even as his hands hanged about uselessly, delivering rapid kicks that I dodged without any particular difficulty, only to suddenly spin, no doubt directing all of his remaining energy into the final kick to my neck. And had I been any slower, and admittedly not tough enough to probably tank a freight train, he would have had a chance of actually breaking it. Too bad I had grown bored with the disparity by this point. He was impressive, and I found it a shame that his religion compelled his death when he could do so much still. I had given him enough glory and gave him the chance to prove himself before his god-king, and that was enough. I suddenly spun around much faster than before, the back of my hand slamming into his cheek with far greater force as he was thrown into the nearby wall, leaving broken teeth and blood in his wake. He did not get up this time. Tough bastard, wasn't he? I asked as I turned to the suddenly inhabited temple. Strong body, strong will. The conceptually ugly creature before me spoke. True enough. I nod patiently. Was there any point to this entire thing? Test, Malakath said, for him and for you. Oh. I quirk an eyebrow, pretending surprise, and I trust I passed. You showed strength. His tone felt almost forcefully simplistic. You showed honor. How flattering, I drawl. There is a hint of something in his eyes as I say this, but he goes on, the way forward is open. Why, thank you kindly, I grin and turn to leave. I do wonder, however, how long are you going to keep pretending to be what you are not? The Daedra pauses, the clear intelligence in his eyes shining brightly for the first time in our short meeting, until the time is right. Guess that is all I am getting here. As I pass the corpse by, I cannot help but ask, what was his name? What does it matter? Once Trinimac answered, he is dead. The vision ends then and there, the air around the temple vibrating slightly as I felt it directing some kind of energy to the northeast for a brief moment before it once more stilled. Malakath was a rather odd creature, I had to admit. He was someone betrayed and worse than killed by Boethia, and yet he and the descendants of his subjects kept at it, never once faltering in their vision of a better future. It was almost worthy of respect. Hell, it was worthy of a lot of respect. Except the endurance had long since turned to obstinance. How very vexing. Shaking the thoughts away, I returned to my followers, and soon we set out further south, towards a sunken city and the third temple in need of appeasement. Now if only I could track down that fucker peeking at me for a second time in as many days. Chapter 4, 136. Chapter 55, a cheesy situation. These winds grow more insidious by the hour. Savos comments on the second day of our trek south, a deep frown on his face. I can barely scry the edge of the sea from here. Good thing we have the orb then, I comment, or we wouldn't be able to send messages out either. Not that I had any issues with scrying, which would have been genuinely worrying. Raven, he sighs, most magi can't send long-range messages no matter what. I blink, right. I forgot about that. He gives me a gaze laden with doubt for whatever reason. All I did at this was chuckle darkly. Your arrogance aside, my grandfather chuckles, I think we can both agree at this point that the winds are more than simply caused by magic. Yup, I nod immediately, they are quite cursed. Of course you already got that, he mutters to himself, and do you know what the curse does? Mostly a type of nothing shall ever grow here, curse of spite I'd say, I answer after a bit of silence, drawing immediate eyes from the rest of the magically capable. The perpetrator should be rather obvious, but I find it hard to accept that even he would be quite so spiteful. Indeed, Savos frowns, you don't suppose he enchanted the rock before the fact? Made the whole, should you cease to love me, I will cease to protect you, threat not a bluff. Wouldn't put it past the sanctimonious ass. I shrug. We were discussing Vivek quite plainly, yet another topic of curiosity finding its way to our bored minds as we resumed trudging through the ashes of Vardenfell. And that is how most of our trek went. Short bouts of either magical discussion or pointless banter accompanied by long silences, only broken by meal breaks and the rare rest stop when the weaker Mer got too tired to go on. The Ashlanders present, including the unmourned, also taught me a game of theirs about throwing rocks for points and the like, but it was interesting for only a good 10 minutes before it too melded in with the monotony. Kind of difficult to keep a hyperactive mind occupied when all around you is swirling grey with spots of red. So I decided to do some actual work, pulling out the Aldmer book on spiritualism I won when I took Harkon down, and spent the rest of the day flipping through it all a good 3 times, making sure every detail of what I wanted to accomplish was in order. The sheer mental gymnastics one would need to engage in to even comprehend the damn thing would have probably melted my head if I was still my old self. Even now, I somehow emerged from the experience with a throbbing headache. I shudder at the memory of it being even worse. Thankfully, I was not forced to delve any deeper into mind-boggling mechanics of the universe, as upon the dawn of the 3rd day, we finally reached our destination, the ruins of Vivek City at the southernmost point of Vardenfell. And how refreshing it was to actually see the dawn for once. Fucking Ash. Well, we stopped by the Erebonimson encampment first, but word of my call had already reached them, and the entire warrior clan had packed up and were currently making their way to Aldruin and leaving only a short message carved into a waystone, something Masur and Massanor were a mite disappointed about since they saw me give gifts to every tribe I visited. It was just too bad that the tribe priding itself on efficiency was a bit too efficient this time. Nomadic nuisances aside, Vivek City looked just about as pristine as one might expect, a city struck by a meteor charged with Daedric energies, which is to say not at all. Of the once numerous square islands raised by Vivek's divine power, only a trio remained on its westernmost fringe, even if the buildings were most certainly abandoned, as I could still feel the subtle aura of the crash suffusing the entire place. Living here would be immensely uncomfortable, which is why I didn't even pause as we approached it, the Mer behind me all looking less than enthused by the idea, but none of them able to tell me to stop. I had by now carved my right to rule all of them into their minds, intentionally or not. Bar Dao, the great rock of Sheogorath, was shattered by the impact, but the largest chunk of it I could feel was nestled deep within the ruins of the Tribunal Temple itself, no doubt a joke by the mad god, and a final salting of the wounds of Vivek. Never liked the hermaphroditic little shit, far too preachy for a hypocrite of his caliber. It would seem we have found our destination. I raise my voice over the howling of the winds that seem to be far harsher in this place. You don't mean... Virin Indaril pauses as he sees my expression. Is that wise, my lord? Probably not. I shrug. But the job still needs doing, and I doubt we will find a place of power belonging to Sheogorath anywhere nearly as convenient. That is what bothers me. Savos cuts in. It feels too convenient. Well, that is probably because it is. Ole Sheo is known to appear exactly when people find it fitting. I point out, we are still going in, though. Some of them, mostly Savos and Virene admittedly, grumbled, but in the end they all realized our choices were not abundant here, so with heavy steps we reached the coast of the inner sea, and I quickly transmuted a boat from all the iron I was carrying around. Don't ask. The boat was large and well-balanced, but it would have probably still toppled over under our collective weight if Savos and I were not keeping it nice and stable the entire way to the temple. On our way, we saw the ruins of hundreds upon hundreds of houses, all of them once neatly stacked, next to and atop each other, in a place once considered to be the safest and one of the most prosperous in the world. All we found now was rot, debris, and submerged skeletons. So many gods-damned skeletons. This place truly is cursed. Dagoth Vemris scowls, so much death, and all of it for the ego of a betrayer. Those usually have the biggest egos I've found, I quip, though I feel if we were to start shoveling every wrong done by all those involved, we would soon descend into a 10-hour religious debate, and not all of us here are as interested in that as Vairan. The spindly elf inclines his head in agreement. The priest, on the other hand, looks downright disappointed. Our conversation is stopped as the prow of the boat hits rock, signaling the end of our journey. We disembarked, and I had Akulakan keep watch over both the ship and the entrance we found, which was rather odd when you consider the temple had been both exploded and under constant ash storms for the past 200 years. Very odd, yet oh so utterly expected. Why, you might ask yourself? Well, and so do not lose faith, my brothers and sisters. A voice thundered through the passage we were currently sneaking into. Hold on to your zeal and your loyalty, and one day our gods will return, resplendent and powerful, and the golden age will be upon us once again. I could practically feel Viren vibrating in zealous rage behind me. The faithless will see the error of their ways, and their betrayal will be washed in a sea of blood. The preacher went on, and we will not make the same mistakes as our ancestors. The vile Ashlanders who kept to the accursed Daedra will not be given a moment of succor. Who the fuck is this Swit? Massenor hisses. A tribunal temple remnant. I point out dryly, our voices hidden by the cacophony coming from beyond. Not a very numerous group, but they were bound to be hiding somewhere. All four of the unmourned unsheathed their weapons without a moment's hesitation, and Scorch materializes on my shoulder on his own. Is it murder time? The bird chirps with manic glee in his tiny eyes. Yes, Scorch. I nod sagely. It is murder time. And this was exactly when we stepped into the roughly refurbished chamber within which Vivek once floated. Hell, I could even feel the distant remnants of his presence vaguely. Within stood a gathering of some 130-ish Dunmer, all of them dressed in jarringly obvious tribunal robes, and all of them currently staring at us with eyes filled with surprise and fear. Good thing they didn't bring their kids here. Ladies and gentlemen, I clear my throat and grin. This temple is now under the domain of the sixth house, and the tribe unmourned, all heathens, heretics and squatters who do not vacate the premises within 10 seconds will be terminated with extreme prejudice. I loudly counted to 2 before the first spell was launched. Sadly for my terminally bored self, the moment I broke the spellcaster into tiny chunks with a snap of my fingers, and my followers cut down the few actually brave fanatics, the rest of them began fleeing or trying to surrender, and at that point, even my disdain for the idiots reached its limits. Grumbling expletive after expletive to myself, I grabbed Scorch with one hand before he could eviscerate an old man and pulled him back, eliciting a betrayed yelp from the poor bird and a confused, if still terrified, look from the elf. One wave of powerful magicka had everyone shutting up and looking at me. Right, fun as it sounds, I am not butchering over 100 defenseless people. So, my eyes narrow and I channel waves of menace with every word. How about you lot explain the utter filth I had just heard? It did not take long for me to convince the poor fools to talk about their religion, and it was pretty much what I expected. Those who lost everything in the fall of the tribunal or were simply made poorer or less powerful by it wanted their good times back, and the preacher capitalized on it all by organizing them into a cult. The main tenet of the whole organization was that they would help each other rise, which ironically brought many of them to respectable levels of wealth and power, but the underlying purpose remained the same even after well over 150 years of preaching. Levels of wealth and power in positions that would be quite useful for me. Most of my followers complained about leaving them alive, but they were satisfied enough once I found the priest hiding behind his altar and eviscerated his ass. I then told the trembling cultists to approach and introduce themselves to me one by one as I wrote down their names and instantly forwarded them to the Morag Tong, making sure they all understood what that meant. Allow me to make something abundantly clear, I say with a content smile as they see the envelope with the guild's crest disappear from my hand. From now on, until I've felt like you have done enough to redeem yourselves, I own you. All you will do. I say as I step by a few shivering Dunmer, all you will aspire to, I go on, will be to serve me and aid my aims. I stop and turn back to the crowd. But I am a generous mer, should you prove yourselves useful and not foolish enough to follow the 3 retards. And oh boy, does that rile some of them up. I might even raise you up from the filth you are now. I finish with a grin, purposefully meeting the eyes of the most enraged. Before any of them can say anything, I add, I am glad we could all meet under such delightful circumstances, My languid expression shifts to one of disgust. Now leave this place and never come back. They did not need much convincing. I was even nice and let them pick up their traveling supplies, after taking their robes and burning them in front of them, of course. Well? I exhale as they leave the chamber. That was a nice distraction. Turning towards a chamber sealed by numerous rocks, I sigh, once more unto the breach. The rocks fell before me, my followers having been told to wait behind me, and I step into the grand chamber that was meant to be occupied by a giant piece of meteor. I say meant because what awaited within was not in fact mere rock, but an entire dining chamber, decorated to excessive perfection and beyond, though every dish currently being served was, you guessed it, cheese. And of course, at the head of the table sat a dapper old man, a silver-haired, rose and purple-dressed old man. And to think I managed to evade him for so long, only to walk into his gaze of my own volition. Well, 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 Sheogorath's eyes shine with maddened interest. If it isn't the little daggy everyone has been talking about. He probably doesn't even realize he almost called you a dog, Raven. Leave it be. I quickly count to 5 and calm my impulse to rip him a new one, and if it isn't Uncle Sheo. I grin. I've heard a lot about you. Oh. He perks up, his fork trembling between his thumb and pinky finger. Only terrible things, I hope. Most dreadful, I assure you, I say dryly and invite myself to his table, something he doesn't bother commenting on. Neat place you have here. His look darkens for a moment, but it also immediately shifts onto one of cheer. Of course. I am, after all, on my vacation. As you deserve, of course. I nod along for a moment. Here is to hoping I wouldn't be dragged into one of the madman's games. Did Mephi, I pointedly do not cringe at the nickname she told me to use, ask you to do something perchance? He frowns. Maybe? He twitches, quite possibly, before stabbing his fork into the table, only for the furniture to let out a silent moan. Probably not. Rolling my eyes, I summon the most expensive roll of cheese I could ever get my hands on in Cyrodiil, and proffer it to him with both of my hands. Accept my tribute, O cheesy one. My voice was dried than the desert as I completed the ritual and looked up. How about now? The air around the madman was growing violent, so I had already begun summoning my divine magic just in case. His whole body twitches violently, and his eyes narrow, the expression continuously shifting as the creature continued its eternal battle with itself. No! He barks suddenly. You made Shelley upset. He even told me to bugger off yesterday. I am not he. It was at this point I let out just a bit too much power on instinct. He twitches violently now, and a crash is heard as the space before me cracks, and the old man is replaced by a majestic red-haired woman that looked suspiciously like Minthara. Except she replaced all the elegance she got from her elven side and went full Nordic Amazon with her build. I will be the first to admit the image did things to me. You, the woman spoke in a powerful voice, how did you make it flee? Champion Ulrika, I presume, I ask instead of answering, and her hand twitches, cracking the space around her. Not one for small talk, I see. I chuckle wryly. It could have something to do with my powers. I tend to irritate beings of power. She narrows her eyes, the two blue orbs practically glowing with contained might. Can you make it permanent? Possibly. I shrug, and she immediately glares at me, forcing me to explain what I meant. I haven't actually tried doing something of that scale at all, ever so it could go either way. As if I'd ever let an opportunity like this one miss me. Composing my excited mind, I elaborate, but I would be more than willing to help you, seeing how beings of your power work would be incredibly useful to me. Tilting my head, I add, though I doubt it will be either quick or uncomplicated. Of course, the warrior woman scoffs, things worth doing are rarely simple or easy. Such is the world we live in, I commiserate before adding a leading, I do have a pertinent question though. Speak, she commands, slight irritation in her tone. Was your other side? She straight up growls at that, pushed back by me, or did I simply give you an opening? The latter, obviously. The champion rolls her eyes. You are powerful, child, but not that powerful. Good. I nod. I had no idea what I did exactly. At this, some amusement enters her eyes. My other side, as you call it, she says with understandable disgust, is in contact with Mephala, is it not? Supposedly. I shrug. Not like she tells me what she does with the rest of the Daedra all the time. She just told me to use specific words with the madman and he would open the way for me. Good. She nods. I will use her to contact you then, her or the small lizard anyway. She leans on her folded hands. Now you wanted something from the creature? See, I am on something of a quest right now. I proceed to explain what she needs to know about my task, much to her growing appreciation. A hero of the age. She chuckles, how nice to meet a colleague. Oh, but it gets even better, I say with a smirk. She raises a surprisingly elegant eyebrow. Oh, want to hear about your dragonborn descendant? And it was then that I found that Ulrika's own brand of madness manifested in obsession over her family and those she considered close to her. At first, she was thankful I saved Minthara from the fate given to her by the Void, but once she caught one, tell too many, I was promptly given a 6-hour-long shovel talk by the feminine side of a mad god. That I managed to survive and leave the place probably meant she kind of accepted me, and I was not sure if I liked that fact or not. I left the submerged temple with tired bags under my eyes, too tired to even care about the irritating peeping Tom at the edge of my senses or the worried glances of those who followed me into this literal hell on earth. Come on then, I said as I approached my followers, all of whom looked relieved to see me return to them alive. One final place to visit and we can be done with these damned winds. It was 2 days later, as we marched north, that we were met with a cloaked figure that soon revealed themselves to be an Argonian wearing Telvanni heraldry. He gave me one look, bowed deeply, and spoke. Sarushtakai greets the Great Ones. The title was evidently directed at myself and Savos. My master, the mighty Divaith Fear, cordially invites Lords Dagoth and Aren to his tower so that they may partake of his hospitality. He turns his gaze to the rest of them. Your servants shall be provided lodgings for the duration of the stay. Respectful and to the point, Fear chose his servants well. I shared one quick look with Savos, and we both agreed at the same time, why not? Chapter 4, 137. Chapter 56, A True Mer of Culture. The large wooden boat rocked almost rhythmically as Sarushtakai, whom I learned was a lifelong retainer to Divaith Fear, like his ancestors before him, steered the way to the small archipelago to Vardenfell's west. There were allegedly hundreds of small islands dotting the area, but only a few were of any size worth mentioning, and upon one of the westernmost islands stood an ancient tower grown from an emperor shroom Telfir, and it was quite the sight indeed, if the wards around the Urshilaku tribe barely kept the worst of the ash storms at bay, then the wards around Telfir kept every single potentially negative effect out, creating what was essentially heaven on earth when compared to the vast majority of the island and even parts of the mainland. Though one detail drew my attention immediately. The Zainab were given succor by great Divaith. Sarushtakai speaks without prompting. In turn, they serve the needs of him and his assistants. The nomads are grateful enough that almost no rules were broken thus far. Almost? I ask as I observe the small village. The Zainab were reportedly the least Ashlander of all the greater Ashlander tribes, and it showed as they preferred trade and interaction with outsiders as opposed to the others, who were all isolationist to differing degrees. Indeed, the lizard hisses with dark amusement. One fool tried sneaking into the corpusarium without permit. They punished him themselves, which is why they are still here. Interesting, I mutter and ask, the corpusarium. My master kept the name. The Argonian pulls his lips back into an animalistic grin. He felt nostalgic about it. Understandable, I nod. An immortal without a hobby sounds dreadfully boring. He nods almost reflexively, as if having heard the statement hundreds of times before. We were soon brought to shore and disembarked in short order, only a pair of respectably powerful spell swords watching over us as we did. Once we got close enough to the great tower, Sarushtakai stopped. I will take your servants to their lodgings now. One of the mistresses will greet you once you are inside. Very well, I turned to Veyrin and the two Ashlanders. You three should go to the Zainab and tell them what is going on. It would be a shame if they didn't get the message due to bad weather. Veyrin accepts easily enough, and the two Erebanimson follow along, even as they hold box sneers of disdain. The two tribes did not like each other very much, as the warriors considered the traders to be weaklings. It was an old rivalry, though, and I did not expect much to come of it. Anondor and the Unmourned went to have some rest, and soon Savos, Akulakan and myself were entering the tower, the Argonian not looking to stop the automaton, as he knew I wouldn't have him with me without good reason. That, and he could not stop me if he wanted to. The confidence he has in his master is quite inspiring, though. I note as the wooden doorway splits open on its own and reveals a grand hall within, containing all the opulence of the most powerful nobles and all the mystique of an ancient sorcerer. One moment, dearest guests. A cheerful feminine voice rings out, and a few moments later a Dunmer woman walks out of one of the adjoining passages. She looked like she had been sculpted into existence, seemingly not a single imperfection present in her build or looks. Dressed in comfortable-looking robes, she greeted all three of us with a cheerful smile. "Greetings, honorable guests. I am Beta. Savos and I introduce ourselves, even if we knew it to be unnecessary, and while she gives us both a blinding smile, she focuses a stare on Junior, waiting for him to introduce himself. Sending a jolt of approval through our bond, I feel the faintest trace of exasperation within his core as he speaks Akulakan the Younger. The clone's eyes shine with interest as she claps her hands. "Dear husband will be delighted. Please do follow me." And without waiting, she guides us to a carved circle at the end of the hall, above which stood a long hole, no doubt leading to Divaith's inner living space. Without waiting for any further instruction, both Savos and I levitate up while I drag Junior with me. Telvanni were so annoyingly smug about their magic, they considered anyone incapable of levitating up an emperor mushroom to be unworthy of their presence, and with the mushrooms being partly bound to their owners, they alongside them, making visiting more powerful sorcerers that much harder. Which would admittedly be a rather good filtration system if it didn't leave a massive security breach for anyone powerful enough to use, since they tended not to ward the ever-loving shit out of their elevators for convenience's sake. My musings were interrupted as we finally reached the summit of the tower. Beta offered us a respectful bow and directed us to a nearby room, while herself leaving for what I guessed was some form of pantry or kitchen. Not eager to disrespect an elf of Fear's renown by snooping around, we followed her instruction and a few silent seconds later entered a grand dining room, within which we found three figures. One was a bored-looking woman, somewhat plain when compared to Beta, but still physically flawless. She was scribbling something down in a large ledger with the experience of centuries. The other woman present stood behind her and looked down at the ledger with a stern look in her eyes. She looked severe, but just as unnatural as the rest of her sisters, and was clad in enchanted bone mold even within her home tower. The last person, and most certainly not least, was seated against the two as he lazily drawled instructions to the duo. He was clad in simple black robes, but I could see an armor stand nearby, covered in a full set of the rare openly Daedric enchanted armors in the world. And yes, the same man wearing the hearts of literal demons during battle was currently talking to two of his clone daughter wives. Truly, he was the Mer of culture we all aspired to be. No, I am too disgusted by the idea to even finish the thought. The only fact stopping me from being outright repulsed by the whole thing was that they were clones and thus slightly lesser in my considerations. It was what it was. Our host stopped his business the moment he detected Savos's and Junior's presences and immediately perked up, drawing a scowl from his seated clone. "Dagoth, Aaron, how delightful of you both to accept my invitation." Divaith Fear spoke with a familiarity I did not feel. He turned to his clones and quickly added, "Delte, we will finish this later, and Alpha, do bring that scowl off your face already." Uncaring for his clones' deepening scowls, he turned back to us. "Do take a seat, all of you." He pauses and looks at Junior, an amused smirk on his face. "Well, so long as you won't crush the chairs, of course." We follow his instructions, and Junior wordlessly stands behind me. Fear grins and snaps his fingers, opening the door that had closed behind us and letting Beta enter as she levitated freshly prepared food all around her. He proceeds to ignore her and looks back to us. "I was honestly expecting to get ignored, so consider me pleasantly surprised by your presences." One can only trudge through ash storms for over a week for so long without being tempted to blow up the mountain fully, I drawl. Honestly, your invitation was quite a good excuse to take a break, so I raise a glass of brandy. Baite brought cheers for that. That does bring up the question, Divaith speaks up. Why you would even bother walking across the whole of Vardenfell if you could truthfully fly or teleport around at will. I do hope it isn't something as blasé as masochism. Rolling my eyes at the reminder, I sigh, a prophecy by our dearest Lady of Dusk and Dawn. Me hand-waving half the challenge away would probably annoy her, and I currently need her support for my ambitions. And what ambitions are those? He quirks an eyebrow, seemingly unaware of the happenings of the conclave. You did not hear of what occurred at Blacklight, I ask. He shakes his head. I only know that another Indoril got his head removed. Beyond that, I frankly do not care. After a few centuries, all politics turn into a pattern and become incredibly boring. He scoffs. And what an understatement that is. Humming along, I nod. I won't try and lecture you about it, since I haven't lived nowhere near as long, but you should at least pay attention to the invasion going on. That kind of thing can bite you in the back if you aren't cautious. Do not think me the same kind of weakling the previous Telvanni council was. He scoffs with genuine derision. Besides, I pay quite enough attention to it all. I even sent my apprentice south, as you well know. Ah yes, I say dryly. Your apprentice who is yet to finish full battle training and knows only of destruction magic. How very responsible. He shrugs without a care. I only accepted her under my care when Carvani offered to supply me for free for a decade. I never assured the fool I would do my best to raise her up. Frankly, someone of your reputation teaching her anything will probably raise her within the house by default. Savos cuts in an amused tone, so it isn't like the favor has been wasted. The letter was followed, but not the spirit. Exactly, Fia says cheerfully and turns to me. Now, about those ambitions you mentioned. The usual, I shrug, uniting Morrowind and helping reunite the Empire, bring peace to the world, etc., etc. How positively droll? The ancient mage says sarcastically and rolls his eyes. I expected more creativity from one of your talent. I don't need to be creative with my goals if the means by which it is achieved are creative on their own merit. I point out, making grand declarations is easy, following through is difficult. Too true. The old elf raises a glass in agreement. I take another short sip of the drink and raise an eyebrow. How very delightful. What is this? Fire chuckles. Dagoth brandy. Savos also takes a sip and hums approvingly. Unable to stop a chuckle, I shake my head. You are certainly prepared. One grows bored over the millennia. The ancient elf explains, my collection has many things I will not lament losing for good conversation. Now that I can understand. Savos chuckles. After so many years of teaching, my vault is so overflowing, I have no idea what to do with most of it. He tilts his head. I tried setting up an orphanage once, but after the third corrupt matron, I grew annoyed by the idea. The laments of rising so far beyond our peers, I suppose. Fear commiserates. What weak mindsets. I shake my head in false pity, drawing curious gazes from my fellow archmagi, and one of concealed fury from Alf. Once you gather enough resources and followers, the obvious next step is to create a society you may call your own. Alfie's furious look shifts into one of instant agreement. Fire, on the other hand, huffs. That sounds like entirely too much work. Dealing with mundanes is so very tiring. Truly, Dagoth, you waste much of your best years on such petty things. Oh, please, don't project your boredom onto us, old man. I scoff. How else is the world supposed to have any excitement? He rolls his eyes but doesn't disagree. Also, you don't have to do it yourself, I point out with a slight smirk. Just have someone else do all the work and take all the credit. Think of it as a collection that grows itself, something carved into the world that exists only because of your patronage. I do suppose the idea sounds interesting if you put it that way. The ancient mage hums. Personally, I already started on a project like it. I say with genuine pride. Silrune Fell is living proof of my idea, so do feel free to visit and see for yourself whenever you have the time. Divaith Fear chuckles. I fully expected this to be a meeting where I, the elder, enlighten two magi on the cusp of their power, but this is also good. He inclines his head ever so slightly. Consider your invitation accepted, young Dagoth. He turns to Junior. Now, about your machine. He pauses. It has a rather interesting name. I was not even slightly surprised he observed our entire arrival. He has stopped being a machine a bit of time ago, actually. I toss him a proverbial bone. Keeping this old fart interested would no doubt bring boons galore. An odd interaction within Sovngarde had his core develop a soul. A soul, you say? Both of Divaith's eyebrows rise so far they'd likely disappear within his hair, if it hadn't receded as far as it did. His eyes take on a new glint. I don't suppose you brought him here as a gift. All three of his present clones tense, fully expecting me to react poorly. Instead, I stare at him for a long while before letting out the most sarcastic "ha" of my life. Divaith shrugs. Oh well, you can't blame a mer for trying. And the tension disappears as if it were never there. A bit exasperated, I say, I am no longer sure if you are just bored or age has finally managed to addle you. He isn't even slightly offended and waves my accusation away without a care. You will find yourself much the same if you ever reach my age. If I failed in finding a way to leave. Probably, as amusing as all this has been, I speak up after a few moments of pleasant silence. What is the real reason you invited us here? The old elf gives me a faux offended look before chuckling, how poor a host I make to be seen through so easily. He straightens in his seat and bluntly states, I wanted to seek your insights into Corporus. Savo stiffens. The divine diocese is mostly gone by now, but the fact it eluded me for centuries is not something I can stomach. He looked like the question was driving him insane, and considering how knowledgeable he was supposed to be, it probably was. And you expect me to just come out and tell you everything? I ask with a quirked eyebrow. I did have some instinctual understanding of the cursed thing, but it was something too dangerous to just yap about. That, and I did not want fear fucking with the Darhashin before I met them personally and ascertained how the disease worked in truth, or better yet, once I met the one who made it. Of course not. He scoffs. I doubt you even know much about it right now, unless you came to Morrowind as a child without anyone knowing. He asks sarcastically, and seeing me not responding, nods to himself. All I wanted was to place the idea within your mind, the rest shall follow naturally. I tug on my goatee for a moment before lighting up one of my cigars, drawing a raised eyebrow from the old elf. Without a care, I tossed him one and took a long drag, letting it all out in one long breath. I wouldn't mind some cooperation in understanding it all. Divaith also partakes of the Evil Vizard Vide and raises a surprised eyebrow at how good it felt to one's magicka. But, he asks after hiding a slight cough. He may be magically powerful, but his physicality was lacking. It seems, but I am unsure what I should ask of you in return. I pause. Your participation in the upcoming counter-invasion is a must. He looks like he wants to deny me out of hand, but holds himself back. War is not something I like participating in. You will not be expected to do more than any other archmage, I point out, and in the worst case, you can be posted to hold supply routes or whatever. But you need to take a walk, old man. I am surprised you and your tower haven't rotten from lack of dusting by this point. Oh boy, all three clones feel like they want to punch me in the neck. To be fair, my words were more a slight against them than Divaith. Not that I cared. Very well, he grumbles and immediately narrows his eyes, but I can see this will not be enough, so before you go and ask me for something asinine, like holding a few lectures, how about I offer you an artifact from my corpusarium instead? Oh? I raise an eyebrow. And what artifact might that be? He grins widely. Have you ever heard of the sword going by the name of Umbra? The conversation continued deep into the evening and then into the morning. We discussed everything from Dwemer Automata to Savos's conjuration expertise and the spell he was currently working on, to Divaith's own prowess in alteration and restoration. He even shared some theoretical snippets with us about creating proper life the artificial way, even if he outright stated that the true process was not something he would trade for anything not of equivalent worth. In the end, I traded a few conjuration-focused enchantments I did on site and contact information for the source of my wizard weed. Hakan would be getting some big orders soon. For a few of Devaith's own journals on restoration, copied of course. The clones Alpha, Beta, Delta and Upsi were all rather ambivalent about my presence. On the one hand, I paid their husband no true respect, while on the other, I was an honored guest, Fear treated as an equal. Oh, I was pretty sure he could not feel even the slightest trace of my power, but the fact alone was more than enough to make him cautious around me. His magicka was mighty and honed over millennia, but mine was nearly as sharp and a deathly torrent compared to his mere raging river. Proverbial staff measuring aside, we were currently being led by Upsi Fear, the caretaker of the Zainab currently living under Fear's tower, to the small building given to the rest of my followers. She showed us the way and was promptly dragged away by some concern or other of the nomads. The band all looked rather well rested, and even Anandor looked relieved that he had finally gotten a full day under at least some sun. There was some disappointment we would be leaving so soon, but they would learn to thank me for it later. Which is, of course, when the Ashkan of the Zainab stopped me, having learned of the invitation to Aldrun and seemingly rather put off by it. Naturally, that is when I learned it was actually a ploy for him to guilt me into buying all of his stock. You heard that right, Gilor. The Ashkan of the ancient Zainab clan was in fact a shady oil salesman trying to sell me his entire stock of natural naphtha. It is good product, yes? He asked as he rubbed his hands. It burns well and can be turned into bombs. Excellent for the war effort, no? That he was more informed of the war than Fear was quite telling. Fucking fine, I sigh in exasperation after a full hour of the elf chittering. Have it all delivered to Kraganmore within the month, and I will pay you 40 septims per amphora. 60, he snaps back immediately. Rolling my eyes and hiding my honest amusement, I answer 45. He pretends to growl in annoyance and declares 55. 50, and if you fuck me, I will throw you into Red Mountain. I counter. He actually shivers at this and nods rapidly. Have no fear, good sir. Gilor's merchandise is of the finest quality. Excellent, I grin. Now how about you tell me about that nearby temple to Molag Bal? He pales. General point of view. Gilor of the Zainab was quite happy with his profits today. The terrifying creature posing as Lord Dagoth was quite the negotiator, but he still managed a good profit for his tribe. The mention of the temple was rather worrisome, though, even if he suspected the Urshilaku hags had something to do with it. It was then that Gilor looked north in the direction of that self-same ancient edifice to the Lord of Domination, exactly in time to see a massive explosion of golden flame rising through the disturbed ash, followed by a roar of fury and then silence. Gilor decided he needed to get his tribe moving west post-haste. Best not make that creature wait after all. Chapter 4. 138. Chapter 57. Kogorun. Raven's point of view. My lord, Dagoth Ulthis, shuffles after me with hesitance in both step and voice, his eyes focused to the southwest and up above us. Are you certain that it will be fine? His question was obviously referring to the massive volcano above us, currently spewing forth even more poison, fire, and detritus than usual. All of it started when I blew up old Molly's temple without even bothering to enter. Still worth it. Scorch and I think at the same time. I look up to Red Mountain for a long moment before shrugging. It shouldn't turn catastrophic too quickly. My eyes narrow, at least not before I do as I plan. And I would most assuredly do as I wanted, even without the obvious political and magical boons awaiting within my decision had been reinforced by forces beyond such petty things. Quest issued. Save the lands of Morrowind from a slow death. Reward, a comprehensive guide to stepping through the dark forest. A reward I straight up salivated at upon seeing it for the first time. And what is your master plan anyway, Raven? Savos appears next to me. You have been rather vague about it this entire time, and frankly I am starting to get worried. A ritual, I actually answer, surprising him. But instead of accepting that he narrows his eyes, that is all I am getting, isn't it? His frown deepens as he begins muttering, still, a ritual of that scale, Cleansing a mountain saturated with the power of a dead god would need a focal point. He stills and looks up at me, mouthing a terrified no. My grin threatens to split my face as I begin walking faster. Oh yes. Damn it, Raven, get back here, Savos yells after me. And so it was that the remaining stretch of my pilgrimage was spent dodging Savos and his constant nagging. Seriously, I did much dumber things before, but the moment I try and do something a bit ambitious, he loses his shit. Old folks these days. Still, I was also slowly beginning to decipher the little shit spying on us gave off. Too bad I would not fully manage it before the time came. A worrisome thought, and something I could not permit to threaten me right now. Guess I will just have to be 10 times as paranoid as usual. What could possibly go? Fuck no, I am not finishing that thought. You are certain it is here? I ask Ulvis in a mildly impressed tone. My ancestral home was concealed so perfectly, even I could not detect it as it was right now. Probably for that exact reason, as they could actually perceive weaknesses, unlike most people. I am, my lord. He bows deeply. Kogaruan welcomes you home. He raises and with appreciable theatricity snaps his fingers, causing a small jolt of his magic to touch the suddenly visible wards and temporarily unravel them. The large mound of ash-covered stone extending from Red Mountain itself splits in half, revealing a long and very tall corridor within. Dozens of my own banners dominating the pillars at perfectly equidistant intervals. I take a long breath of the oddly welcoming air and grin, home sweet home. The moment my voice spread, all 30 of the panicking warriors in full-plate orichalcum prostrated themselves on the ground. Not a one of them so much as twitching as they awaited my response. Way to fucking ruin my mood. I roll my eyes and splash them with a wave of my divinity. Something told me things were about to turn far, far more irritating. The confused guardsmen led me through the great tunnel, most of them still unwilling to speak, while the leader silently questioned Ulvis about what exactly just happened, looking quite rattled by the change happening within him as he did. Due to Fear's request, and a bit of my own curiosity, I spent the last 2 days of travel closely examining the changes in Ulthis's little band, and came to some interesting discoveries. Firstly, now that their sight was their own, it had become sharper and could take in more information, pretty much making a lesser version of my own bloodline. Secondly, and most importantly, the lot of them gained a small healing factor instead of their previous resistance to bleed out, and an extra century slapped onto their already prolonged lifespan. All in all, a grand thing for my new servants to have, and something to invest more time in, as rewarding the loyal with a direct family line boost was a no-brainer. After a lot of refining, of course. Leaving such thoughts for later, I focus back on the tunnel as we reach a grand gateway, engraved with the masked visage of my ancestor, stylized to hell, and back to look downright intimidating. Like a god looking down at his subjects, in fact. 4 of the guards walk by me, with heads bowed, and activate runes on both sides in a particular order, sending a shudder through the gate and causing it to open on its own. The sight beyond was not what I expected. The Kogarun I knew was basically a half-underground stone fortress, barely worth the name after centuries of disrepair. What I saw now was an underground city seemingly built around that one simple keep, its ceiling almost a third as tall as that of Blackreach itself. And it was not a mere shanty town of tents and tunnels, but an actual underground settlement. All of it made from suitably dark volcanic rock, with numerous farms powered by low-level magical artifacts, animal pens holding the dozens of stolen kwama and many, many mine shafts. Even the central residential area looked surprisingly lively, with shops, taverns, and to my great amusement, large homes connected by clotheslines. A light burst of happiness bubbled from within me at the sight. That is, I pause. Seeing my confusion, Ulthis steps in. The house has been focusing on recovery for centuries now. We rarely leave the run, but recently our numbers have grown enough to risk it. No, I get that. I wave him off, my eyes still looking at the oddly bustling town. I just expected a lot more gloom, I suppose. The house would never lose faith. The leader of the guards cuts in, immediately bowing at the perceived rudeness. My lord. Yes, I can see that. I nod at him and begin walking down the stairway, and right next to numerous defensive emplacements manned by dozens of awestruck elves. The way to the core of the settlement is a winding one, leading us to pass through most of it before we reach the grand dome-shaped keep in the center of it. All of the Dunmer in between, reacting to my presence much the same as I've come to expect so far. Even the children were not spared. The realization brought only disgust. Vardis, what is the meaning of this? Who told you to abandon your post? A rough, scratchy voice rings out the moment we step into the central square, a decrepit-looking Dunmer with holes seemingly rotten into his cheeks, followed by 6 warriors clad in full ebony. Them having ebony would make sense, what with ebony pretty much being Lorcan-charged volcanic glass. I note absently. A rather useful discovery that easily raised this place from nostalgic curiosity to strategic point of interest. And that is as far as the old elf got before his eyes widened as he stepped into my range, and his guards, imposing and powerful a mere moment before, found their heads in the pavement. The old elf still stood, though, and audibly choked as his eyes met mine. His back straightened, a hand moving to his heart, as he did a perfect aristocratic bow. He chokes on his voice again, before visibly forcing himself to go on, Your Divine Majesty. That is odd, I say with light amusement. You are not simpering like the rest of them. My mere voice makes him visibly flinch, but he does raise his head. Your eyes tell me that would be disappointing, and my very blood boils at the mere thought. He hisses through gritted teeth. High Counselor Althis greets thee, Lord Dagoth. Kogaruin welcomes its true master. And I am quite glad to be welcomed. I smirk at him, and he holds back a shudder, turning my smirk into a grin. A spine grown by age, I see. He grins despite his instincts, no doubt screaming at him to not offer offense. Quite so, my lord, he says with difficulty. The previous lord's blessings are a heavy burden to carry, but I shall continue doing so, no matter the cost. I see no reason to put you through such torment, I say simply, and his eyes narrow, but I was already going to do this no matter what, as my voice rose, tinged with all my power. Gather at the town square, carefully. The fact I felt the need to add that last part once a few of the fools nearly threw themselves off a tall building really illustrated just how much of a piece of shit Dagoth was. By the time everyone, and I do mean everyone within the city, gathered, I stood surrounded by some 1,700 elves. A bit more than Althis told me, but not massively so. All of them were staring at me with awe and reverence, something I had to order them since they had been cursed into preferring their heads in the dirt. Not on my fucking watch, your loyalty to the house. I pause as my voice carries through the crowd, best to start with a bit of praise to stop any foolishness. Astounding. A good number of them shudder at the approval. Such dedication is unseen from Somerset to Atmora. And yet, a tension grows in the air. I will not be party to forced obedience and the domination of the mind. My voice raises, now tinged with my inner fury at the very idea. You may serve me, as you have served my ancestor, but you will do so of your own free will. Unbound by a curse most of you did not accept willingly. I finish it with a growl, such is my decree. Before anyone can do something insultingly stupid again, a wave of my divinity bursts out in a wave, immediately catching all of them within its radius and dispelling the final remnants of Lorcan's stolen power. Althis completely stills before slowly looking down at his shaking hands, even as his once ruined face slowly began restoring itself, his once half-hypnotized eyes looking up at me with genuine free-willed astonishment. The entire square is completely silent. This ... Althis rasps, from the moment of my birth I had been under command and thrall. He looks up at me as his face is stuck in a momentary paralysis, almost as if he was having a heart attack, tears flowing freely from his eyes. You are free now, I tell him gently. He laughs bitterly as he takes a step back and allows his backside to simply fall onto the staircase leading to the keep. A part of me wants to lash out at you for taking it away. He pauses, as if expecting the corporus to punish him, but obviously feels nothing. Blissful slavery will never surpass even the worst suffering of your own free will. I tell him with conviction. He shakes his head and looks up at me with bitterness. And what can a thrall of centuries do when his masters abandon him? Learn, I smirk, and no one said anything about abandoning you. He stills, unlike my ancestor, I do not plan on fooling you into greatness. Oh no, I grin. I will drag you there kicking and screaming. He exhales, nearly snorts really, and picks himself up with strength he did not have, the rest of the nearby Dunmer slowly waking from their stupor. Then by all means, my lord Dagoth. Altis bows to me once more, this time freely, lead us on to glory. To say that things were hectic within Kogarun, following my speech and subsequent blessing, as they were calling it, would be a massive understatement. The kids and those of strong wills dealt with the change rapidly, adapting within minutes as they all suddenly felt a small surge of strength and a sense of freedom, followed by a lack of what one teen best described as "doesn't feel like my father is constantly staring at my back with judgment in his eyes." The rest took hours to bring into lucidity, some of the older ones outright begging to be taken back into the sweet embrace of oblivion. Something I would not grant, as even the oldest among them now had decades upon decades left to live. The sense of chaos in Kogarun lasted for the rest of the day, as I was brought up to speed and did much the same for the rest of them. Almost customarily by now, I summoned previously prepared food and organized a feast for all of them, patiently letting the prominent and talented among them introduce themselves to me as I learned more about my ancestral home. The Dagoth brandy was even better than what Fear had in stock. I was slowly beginning to genuinely like this place and its people. The sense of kinship I felt to most of them was not something I could find in the rest of the world, even if I knew within my mind that it was all artificial. Yet another insidious thing to praise my ancestor for, I supposed. The feast lasted well into the morning, and the people were still joyous both to finally have their prophesied leader return and at what many of them described as my saintly gesture. It was, after all, merely another proof of my divinity to most of them. Still, all good things must come to an end, and my conversation with Althis and the lesser councillors below him inevitably ended at my purpose for coming here and my promise back at the root spire. So, Althis, I speak up, cutting through the silence following my tale, would you care to lead me to the heart chamber now? The Mer looked like he wanted to do anything but, and yet the conviction and certainty in my eyes told him I would be doing this with or without his help. And so I was led through the original Kogarun, the keep itself, through the many winding tunnels and grand chambers within. I even got to see a chamber that was by right my own and had been maintained in anticipation of my coming. I had no time for rummaging through ancient Dagoth vaults, though, and soon we had reached a heavily sealed and warded hatch, for it was too small to be a gate, in one of the southernmost tunnels. My lord, Althis bowed as my party and I approached it. Are you certain you wish to proceed? The mountain, it is not safe. Have no fear, High Counselor. I pat him on the shoulder lightly. I did not come all the way here just to fail. He bows his head and casts a moderately complex spell, opening the way forward. Well then, I clap my hands, into the bowels of hell itself. Savos was not very amused by my choice of words, even as he followed after me. The insides of Red Mountain roiled with power, the seemingly endless lava flows looking almost eager to devour us as we abused the shit out of magic, and my own partial command of all things Lorcan, to cheat our way through what would doubtless have been a gauntlet straight out of hell for most people. It still took us a full day before we reached our destination, as the place was filled to the brim with flaming atronachs of all forms and even some feral sleepers that had somehow adapted to fire. I killed them quickly as an apology for what was done to them. Our destination, what once was the complex surrounding the heart chamber, was mostly destroyed, much as I've come to expect, leaving only the smallest traces of what was once a grand palace, as alien as it was magnificent. All of it was destroyed, save for the heart chamber itself. For the destroyed corpse of Akula Khan, the Elder still held some power, and a bubble of energy had formed within, preserving the site of the explosion and making me almost go berserk with how much of the heart's power still shone within. We stepped through the somewhat unstable bubble of power, sighs of relief coming from all over as we were finally away from the blistering heat. Though their relief did not last long, as a mere second later we were greeted by a voice, powerful and resonant. A voice that echoed from everywhere and nowhere. A voice that was oddly similar to mine, if a lot older. A voice that could only ever belong to a god. Welcome, sun and shade, to this place, where destiny was made. Chapter 4, 139. Chapter 58, Come and Look Upon the Heart. In an instant, everyone except for Junior and myself are shoved outside the protective bubble, the very air within slowing down to a crawl before time itself seemed to stop. No, it did not stop, I realized, as I used my third eye to look behind me and noticed Savos's expression ever so slowly twisting into a panicked fury as his magicka went into full battle mode. But I could not pay too much attention to his inevitably late reaction as the ash and dust of the once heart of Lorcan condensed just above the precipice of the mountain's very core. The ash swirled around itself before, with a soundless yet loud snap congealing into a figure, one I could not possibly fail to recognize as I found myself staring into a facsimile of the body of Dagoth dressed only in loincloth and mask, and 3 triangular eye holes glowing with contained power. Did he seriously scry my fucking nickname just to catch me off guard? I expected better. Stunned, my descendant, he asks with confident arrogance, though I do notice the slightest hint of shock at the fact I was still moving within his little time dilation spell. Unsurprising, you are gazing upon the visage of a god. So that is how we are going to play this. Vorin. I greet him flatly, guess I could rant at him a bit before murdering his disgusting ass. I thought I might find you here. That name is useless to me now. He finally faces me, turning away from curiously staring at his hand. I am Dagoth the sole rightful god of the Dunmer people. I chuckle and roll my eyes, feeling oddly at ease. I don't care about your made-up names, Virin. Your willful ignorance avails you nothing, but I will indulge you. He doesn't look all that bothered, his voice sounding almost indulgent. Why have you come here, child of my creation? To make this mountain my bitch and stop it from ruining Morrowind, of course. I answer flippantly. You certainly haven't done shit to save your people, so it falls to me. Curious, he mutters, what could have possibly caused you to come, away from the homeland your traitorous father escaped to? The spat between you and the rest of the traitors has cursed the land to suffer. I smirk at him, looking down both figuratively and literally. I have come to clean the place up and become the master of Morrowind the proper way. Do not speak of me and the false gods as one and the same. He commands coldly, they were the traitors, and I the avenger of our people's souls. His posture relaxes ever so slightly. Still, it pleases me that my blood remains that of ambition. Whatever you say, I wave him off with an eye roll. What I am really curious about is the fact you yet remain here, even after Nerevar's ascent, and not in the afterlife where you belong. No doubt an act of Azura, something I would be miffed about if I didn't agree. Deserved all the suffering he got. Moon and Star would not begrudge me, he states, full of assurance. He would wish me returned to the world. Ah, but he did begrudge you, did he not? I ask as I lazily point at him. Did you not fall by his own hand? Were your plans not scattered by your friend? His endless arrogance seems to buckle for a split second. A moment of weakness, that is all. My plans shall soon come to fruition, and I alone will speak for the law and the land, and the Dunmer will take the world as its righteous overlords. With smugness bordering on the shit-eating, I ask, how many times did you rehearse that line? Another twitch, though not nearly enough. I see. He sighs dramatically. I had thought my own descendants would have the sight to see, but the insidiousness of the Noir is too great for even my own blood to resist. You have been corrupted by those fools, child. Noir, corruption. I deadpan. Seriously? It is the sole explanation. Dagoth speaks as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. How else would my own creation's creation speak such treason? What a fool you must be to not realize what has been done to you. I feel my lip twitch, and before I realize it, I am grinning. Ha! What a grand and intoxicating innocence. He stills for a moment more. To think that the most corrupted of all would so bravely speak of corruption. He goes to speak again, but I cut him off. I do wonder how your constant betrayal must feel. To think that even after Nerevar honored our house and forgave your sins, you would still be stuck in your own delusions. I take on step forward the suddenly much smaller feeling spirit. The prison of Azura seems to be taking its toll on you, grandfather. His arrogant posture remains for but a moment longer before his shoulders slump and the distinctive shudder of false power disappears from his voice. Your sight is indeed far more powerful than I suspected. Finally done with your posturing. I quirk an eyebrow, guess we are moving on to flattery now. He knew how to act, I will give him that. Likely could have even managed to instill some doubt or sympathy into me if I didn't already super-hate him. Such impiety, his voice is flat, but yes, I will permit you to speak to me openly for the sake of expediency. Scratching my chin and pausing just long enough to annoy him a bit, I ask, so what was that entire show for? Trying to lull me into a false sense of superiority now that you have failed to awe me? Not that it would be false in this case, not even close. Must there be a hidden goal behind my deeds, child? He asks, lazily waving his hand and summoning a magnificent throne, or at least the illusion of one. As you have said, Azura's cruelty is great indeed. My eyes narrow. I've seen the effects of the corpus, you insidious fuck. There is not a single positive thought I have of you, so kindly do not treat me as if I was born yesterday. Ah, my divine disease. He speaks with genuine fondness. My greatest creation, besides Akula Khan, of course. A simple act of divinity to permit all those worthy to ascend. Ascend as slaves to you, you mean? I drawl. Are not all servants slaves to their masters? He asks, no doubt having spoke that very same justification 1,000,000 times. Those lesser to ourselves should know their place in life, and we as their righteous shepherds should not waste time on their foolish whims. The words of a weakling, I roll my eyes and my own seat appears below me, one too cowardly to face a true challenge in his theft of godhood. Theft? Vorin asks. All I did was take what was rightfully mine. Neither the Dwemer nor the false gods of the tribunal were worthy of such power. I even sense it within yourself, you know, this stolen divinity you so curse. It is inherited in my case, I grin. The sin lies solely on yourself. Sophistry? In my heart chamber? He scoffs. What disgrace? After seeing what you did to the poor people serving you, I drawl lazily, simply being in your presence feels violently disgraceful. Honestly, what true Mer has to rely on mind control to earn the loyalty of his servants? Mind control inserted into their very bloodlines so that even their children may not know peace of mind. I offered them ascension. He nearly stands up. And I was cursed for it by all. You offered naught but slavery, I sneer. Fear not though, for I have set them all free. You... He pauses, his gesticulating right hand freezing in place. You did what? I set them free. I fold my hands in front of my mouth to hide my vindictive grin. While your stolen power may have resulted in my own minor divinity, I have been guiding that power to break all curses of the Aedric and the Daedric. No imposed will shall be placed upon my subjects ever again, especially not one to make them loyal to myself. He just stares at me for a few very silent moments before slowly speaking up. How? Wouldn't you like to know? I grin. A weakling such as yourself would not be able to use my answer anyway. Speak, child. He stands up, his throne disappearing as he pointed his almost claw-like finger at me. How did you get around my gift? How did a mere infant take from Dagoth-Ur? It is rather simple, Vorin. I lean forward, still completely ignoring his made-up divine title. I did not base my life on shortcuts and easy power. I challenged myself, unlike you, and grew from said challenge. A true god lay dead below my feet already, and you think I will be impressed by your own thievery? Explain, he commands, the slightest shake entering his voice. Remaining completely silent, all I do is raise an eyebrow. The power around me shimmers, but he does nothing except shifting his posture to a more friendly one and asking, would you kindly enlighten me as to what you meant? And there is the diplomat. I frown, kind of jarring honestly. Quite simple, really. Alduin returned mere months back, and a dragonborn and myself slew him. Too bad you weren't there to see it. Viren was quite happy to see our house raise beyond its cursed origins. Viren, that fool, Vorin spits out, or at least pretends to, and proceeds to completely ignore my deed. His enthrallment with the Imperials has almost ruined our house. I awaited his return for 2 centuries, and yet he never came as he was told to do. He never returned to his place and took up his duties. And for what? To waste his life for a corrupt empire and its corrupt humans. All I say is one word: spite. His now fully clawed hand clutches his increasingly monstrous form, revealing itself to me as an image of an eldritch horror in the making. All that remained of the Dunmer was the shape. Everything else was unnatural. See, Vorin, I speak as I stand up, blasphemy and the razor appearing sheathed on my belt as Void's blink now stood before my right eye. The sole feeling he had for you in life was spite, and like for him, all your actions inspired within me was spite. Spite for your madness, Surge snaps into existence within my grip. Spite for your arrogance, my armor too is summoned. Spite for your evil. The war crown now covers my face. A long dark chuckle leaves the now monstrous once Vorin as he sneers down at me, an expression so absolute I could feel it through his mask. Very well, child. The once powerful voice was now a scratchy growl. Had you been wiser, I may have spared you in the end, but it would seem you have chosen the path of pain. I roll my eyes with a scoff. Oh please, I knew you would try something underhanded the moment you teleported everyone outside. And yet you still chose to indulge me. Dagoth points out, what a fool you are. Many things happen at once the moment he finishes his monologue. First, my golden firestorm slams into his now far more solid body, grinding it down a fair, but not instantly killing him. Second, my very blood screams at me to cease and offer myself in supplication to the master of all, and offer him my body so that he may leave his imprisonment. For all about 1 nanosecond, as my divinity promptly banishes the filthy thought out of my psyche where it damn well belongs. Thirdly, my other hand grasps onto the mortal's razor as the void's blink reveals an appropriate target, causing me to throw the knife straight into the leg of the now charging monstrosity and blow it up in an instant. A wave of power attempts to slam into me, spears of fire, ice, and lightning assailing me from all sides, only for most of their magicka to be absorbed by my armor, while the rest was deflected away by a ward I cast just under the armor itself. He attempted to bombard me once more, summoning the ashen outlines of his once closest advisors, only to have the undead completely incinerated by my mere presence, and his admittedly potent cursed fire be redirected to the ceiling with only minor difficulty. How low the mighty have fallen. The fallen body housing his soul twitches upwards, growing in size even as the surrounding ash and rock failed to restore his leg. With a bestial growl he launches himself at me, still casting increasingly potent spell all the while, only for his form to suddenly be slammed into the ground below him as a Kulakan Jr. becomes visible, completely bodying the poor madman and practically slamming the meager energy he managed to gather during our conversation out of him, that he did not spend on anemic spells anyway. With mentally tired sigh, I approach the barely held-together corpse still housing the soul of what was once Dagoth Vorin, and unsheathe blasphemy, my other hand absently catching the razor and sheathing it once more. The cracked mask of Dagoth looks up to me, revealing to disfigured creature below. He let out a few pained coughs. All I wanted was to be free. Grinning from ear to ear, I summon an item I had prepared exactly for such an occasion, making the poor fucker's soul eye widen as he realized what was about to happen, and I swung out with blasphemy. In an instant, the heavily modified and comparatively massive soul gem within my grasp grabs onto the soul of Dagoth Vorin, even as I use both blasphemy and my divinity to shear his stolen corruptive powers from him, throwing all of it back into the protective bubble of AK Senior. Grin still on my face, I look to the gem now holding within it 3 smoldering embers. Aren't I a good grandson to free you from Azura even after what you tried? The embers flicker, though I wouldn't exactly call it free. I lean in and hiss, more like under new management. The embers blaze with fury, but I stop paying attention to him and clasp the lantern-looking gem to my belt as I turn back to the bubble just in time to see Savos burst through it, with panic in his yes and flames in his hands. Ray Ivin. He stops himself, looking rather comical as he floated in place. Frowning deeply, my sane grandfather looks around and sniffs the air as the rest come in. What happened in here? I unsummon my crown. Dumbfuck tried possessing me. The 4 Dagoths who yet followed me all flinch. He got exactly what he bargained for. I pat the lantern on my belt almost gently. That is, Savos blinks. Great. Exactly, I clap my hands. Now how about you help me set up the most massive ritual ever made before I go berserk and start slurping the fucking dust off the damn floor. The manic look in my eyes got him and the lesser mages present going quite quickly. General POV. He held back a hiss as an ember flew from the cursed fires around him. The pain was easy to ignore, though, as he climbed on, his hands grasping on near-boiling stone with the surety of centuries of experience. Soon his patience would pay off, and he would be able to free himself from both prophecy and powerlessness. Chapter 440. Chapter 59, Carve Thy Name Upon History. General POV. Dagoth Ulthis felt his eyes and skull throb in dull pain for probably the 100th time that day as he caught the slightest hint of the thing being constructed within the chamber. There were far too many shapes for mortal eyes to comprehend, he concluded with a shiver. You all right? The short Ashlander asks him with arms crossed. That is like the 10th time you hissed like an animal. Holding back an instinctual retort at the elf's constant prodding, Ulthis slowly turns to look at him. I am trying to make heads or tails of what they are doing, and I am failing miserably. Both of them turn to the soul-pale elf in their band, drawing the idle gazes of others with them, only to be completely ignored as the Falmer stood perfectly still, staring at the soul-secure approach to their position. Dagoth Vemris cleared his throat. Cedro Anondor. The snow elf finally deigned to acknowledge their presence. Yes? Do you have any idea what they are doing in there? He asks while pointing at the heart chamber behind him. They've shut themselves inside for what feels like a whole day by now. It is not my duty to question my lord's coming and goings. The pale elf responds after a moment. But, he adds before the rest can sigh in disappointment, if I were to guess, they are preparing a grand act of magic to fulfill the pledge and no doubt extract some form of use from the ordeal as well. Vemris turned to Ulthis and shrugged, likely guessing that that would be all he would get without more prodding. Indaril Varin, however, was far too used to such conversations by now, and so he pressed, so they seek to go beyond merely calming the mountain then. The snow elf takes a long breath before finally turning back from the approach. I have no true fact to base this on, but in my experience, my lord has a tendency towards doing ridiculous and unexpected things, usually to the benefit of all, which is why I do not question him now. Well, whatever it is they are doing, Ulthis dares another glance within. It must truly be masterful. Raven's point of view. Gods fucking damn it, Gramps. I need to draw the power into the center and have it gently absorbed, not incinerate everything inside up to and including the fucking sun. Savos pauses his engravings, already bags hung from his eyes as he was forced to keep perfect focus for over 30 hours. We really should take a break. And as fun as that sounds, I pause my own very patient chiseling. We also need to not spend 3 weeks in here. The ritual needs to at least begin today for maximum effect. I summon a potion and toss it at him. Here, this should keep you going for a while. He grumbles a bit, but gets back to work, correcting the slight misalignment and allowing the future circle to properly circulate power. I still think you are taking too big a risk here. You could just do the bare minimum you promise. Gramps, I interrupt him. 3 Daedra want me worse than dead. His mouth clicks shut. And yes, before you say it. I sigh. I know I was the one to provoke literal forces of nature, and it was probably incredibly stupid of me, but those are the facts of my life and I need to deal with them. He looks at me as I get back to work and chuckles. This, Raven, is what you yourself once called a sunk cost fallacy. I turn to him with a grin. Not if I win. He stares for a moment before snorting and muttering, "The fact I consider it an actual possibility is quite ridiculous." He shakes his head and quickly adds, "Not that I want you to lose, of course. It is just—" Yeah, I wave him off. We continued our work in silence for a while longer, creating circles upon circles etched with numerous runes. The lines of such crossed at thousands of points, at a complexity easily described as mind-boggling. The very air seemed to shimmer around the countless symbols, unpowered as they were right now. The vast majority of the runes was arcane in origin, joined equally by Daedric and Aedric workings, even if the latter borrowed much from the works of Magnus himself, a fact I wasted no time in playfully bragging about. Savos pretended to be jealous and accepted the silent lesson eagerly. As I was about to command Akulakan to start pouring out the liquefied heartstone he had been preparing, a faint voice echoed throughout the chamber, coming out in a lazy, self-assured drawl, "Your stabilizing circles are lacking." Both of us frowned as I ever so slowly unbuckled the lantern hanging off my belt and rose it to meet the 3 embers within. I said nothing and merely stared at the awakened soul. The embers, or eyes I suppose, flickered before turning slightly brighter. "Am I wrong in my assessment, child?" Dagoth asked, and I could practically taste his amusement. With a frown, I channeled scrying spell after scrying spell, checking the potential results over and over for a good 10 minutes without saying a word, and there at the edge just next to the fallen head of Akulakan the Elder, I noticed a potential breach. One wrong spark of magicka there, and the whole thing would have exploded. Ever so slowly, my head turns back to the lantern. "What are you doing?" The eyes twinkle mockingly. "You have captured my very being, child," he states, "and I know you could rend my soul to energy and make of me a chamber pot should you have wished. I merely seek to prove myself useful so that my fate is less disappointing." "So what, you want to buy your freedom?" I raise an eyebrow, obviously about to reject him out of hand. "Of course not. I am not a fool." Dagoth scoffs. "Simply do not seek to degrade me or torment me, and I will provide what aid I can. As much as I would have preferred to be the one to lead our kin to glory, your conviction has proven itself greater than mine, and I yet desire my people's prosperity." Now how much of that was blatant ass-kissing? I am having actual trouble detecting the truth of his words, which is a rather horrifying thought in and of itself. "Very well," I say slowly, "but all your suggestions will explain the entire process to me. I will take no whimsical modifications, nor will I entertain arguments towards such." "Of course," the soul emits a chuckle, "your skill at such an age is inspiring, but time and mistakes make for great teachers indeed. Now, what you want to do to fix the edge there?" 38 hours of non-stop magical and material preparations, a mere 2 before the time to begin, was up in this ritual of grand rebirth I had been designing under the guidance of the collected works on spirituality. An unassuming name for such a grand tome, but the Aldmer knew their shit, and it showed. The author was so thorough, I honestly thought he spent an immortality researching this one topic. Admirable obsessions aside, the fact I turned 21 years old in this world on this day was not an instrumental factor, but it helped with the symbolism, and with something this ridiculous I needed all the help I could get. With a fortifying breath, I tossed Dagoth to Savos and signaled for him to leave, something he did after quietly wishing me luck. For a moment I contemplated contacting Minthara, but decided against it. Such distractions would be costly now. Now to go over everything one last time. I half prayed and opened my eyes. The first layer to draw the power, the second to draw the curse, the third to draw the calamity of nature, the fourth to converge it all within, the fifth to cleanse it all, the sixth to subsume it and consume what remains, and the final 7th layer to share the now blessed energy with the land. My task would be to be the guide and conduit, ensuring the energy flowed as it should, and the ritual did not collapse under its own weight. Theoretically, I could have drawn everything into myself, but that would have killed me near instantly. I may be ambitious, but I was most assuredly not suicidal. "Well, at least I won't be alone in conducting," I added mentally as I placed the tiny tree sapling into the center of the massive, overcomplicated ritual circle, now brimming with power. Power my blood begged for, and I denied it still. With a final prayer to the three that sent me here, to Dagon and to Kain and to Ori El Akatosh, I took a deep breath and unraveled. General POV. Savos winced as he felt the power shake the mountain and turned to see if everything was fine, only to see Raven's body explode into so much ash, instantly obscuring what was happening within. His hands shook, but he kept himself from panicking. This was always in the plan, Savos. He knew what he is doing. Even if he decided to rush back inside, he knew he would not be able to do it, since Raven's automaton and his bodyguard stood at the entrance, both of them in battle-ready stances and quite uncompromising, as they stated they would kill anyone who approached now. Savos believed them, and was frankly slightly relieved to have the choice taken from him. He turned to the other elves that accompanied him, opening his mouth to annoy the kids and distract himself with some dumb humor, only for his eyes to widen and his magicka to surge within him as he saw something flash behind the larger Erebenimson warrior. He did not even get to finish summoning his first flaming Atronax as the strike reached its destination, the young warrior's head rolling of his shoulders without a sound and his body slumping forward with a thud. The assailant was thus revealed, doubtless a Mer and clad in once resplendent moonstone armor, now marred with centuries of use, and engraved with the unmistakable iconography of the tribunal temple. Massanor was the first to react to the death of his brother as he threw himself at the assailant in a scream of rage. Aiming to push the enemy off the precipice, he stood atop with his shield, only to get it grabbed and himself be thrown into the abyss. Savos's summons finished their materialization and began pelting his foe with bolts of flame and lightning, forcing him to dodge with steps so fluid the archmage felt compelled to compare them to the flow of water. He grit his teeth and began casting destruction and alteration, both obstructing and attacking his target at the same time. But this enemy was not solely a warrior, and his free hand lashed out, forming the telltale runes of alteration magic with immense precision and rising the volcanic rock around them in the form of sharp spiked walls, sundering Savos's Atronax and impaling Dagoth Kralor, who was on the other end of the passage. The large warrior of Dagoth grunted in pain and slammed the rock with his balled fist, breaking it into pieces and immediately downing a potion even as Indaril Veyrin rushed to heal him. A silence descended, but Savos was not fooled by the lull, and the instant he felt a shift in the air near Dagoth Vemris, he cast one of the new additions to his repertoire, slowing the time around the elf just as the assailant appeared and nearly decapitated him. Savos blasted the figure with a lightning beam, the spell moving through the slowed time at great speeds, yet but not quickly enough to stop Vemris from losing his head as it tumbled down in slow motion. The assailant did not escape unscathed, though, as he was thrown against a wall and forced to cast a ward, stopping Savos's follow-up firestorm. On sheer instinct, recently resharpened, he summoned Spellbreaker just in time to block a bolt of fire powerful enough to crack a mountain peak, and was thrown back himself, getting back just quickly enough to see the enemy rushing him with murder in his eyes. He clutched at the sanguine rose hanging around his neck, carelessly expending all its petals, even as the yet standing elves rushed to help him, and in an instant, the assailant stood surrounded by Dremora, who fell upon him with their oft ridiculous battle cries. Savos felt a bit of sweat going down his brow as he saw them cut down by the dozens, only to manage 2 glancing blows at the foe's arms. The girl Dagoth Azra clutched at her throat even as she bled from a dozen more wounds, and Dagoth Ulthis fell unconscious as a pommel struck him in the forehead. He had not been idle while this was happening, teleporting about and striking the enemy with magic from every angle possible, and some quite improbably. Most were dodged, deflected, or outright reflected back, but 3 struck home and singed the foe's limbs, slowing him down. A burst of magic sent everyone tumbling away, forcing Savos to take a half-second to reorient even as Veyrin and Kralor were knocked out against a wall, the force behind the slam potentially ending their lives. The assailant moved to finish them, but his blade was stopped by a blade of gleaming white, coated in gold, the form of Anandor now standing between the enemy and his prize. The unknown elf scoffed, moving to cut the Falmer down like he did so many others, only to be blocked and countered, coming out of the blinding exchange with more wounds than his foe, and ending up forced to step back for a moment. But he still did land a few blows, And as Anandor went to speak, Savos felt his instincts screaming at him to move as two projection-like copies of the still unknown elf appeared next to him, aiming to skewer him while he was distracted. Savos finally managed to get a moment of peace after 20 seconds of constant teleportation, the projections having followed him constantly, and he stopped just in time to see a stumbling Anandor be struck with an odd dust-like substance that passed through his armor. The paladin struck back without hesitation, cutting into the assailant's helm and cracking it before doubling over and coughing out blood. Blood that now flowed from both his eyes, ears, and mouth. Savos finally managed to defeat the two projections by teleporting back to a place he had already tried escaping to and trapping them in rune traps. His faint sense of victory was short-lived, though, as he was once more forced to teleport away by the true form of the elf, his blood-covered helmet now showing the tiniest hints of golden skin beneath. With each moment Savos managed to waste, the assailant seemed to grow more and more panicked and frantic. "Move, fool!" he hissed in a voice both young and ancient and oddly androgynous. "I did not come so far to be denied by some broken rat." Savos teleported once more, appearing just in front of the entrance to the heart chamber. "This broken rat will shove that sword down your throat." He growled, his hands burning with chaotic flames as he slammed a sudden firestorm at his enemy. The assailant looked just as nonchalant as before, but failed to realize Savos had overcharged the spell while he spoke, spending the final dregs of his magicka to make sure it stuck. He tried blocking it, of course, but his wards cracked under the pressure, and in the next instant all Savos could hear was screaming. Grinning to himself, he rose a potion of magicka to his lips and took a gulp of victory, only to feel himself flying as he was slammed into a nearby wall. Admittedly something that should have taken his attention, but what his mind was truly taken by was the appearance of the burned elf. The faintest line separating gold and grey could now clearly be seen under the burns and broken armor. "Vivek!" Savos's eyes widened, and he immediately injected one of Raven's emergency potions into his thigh, a heavily overcharged destruction spell forming in his free hand. He was completely ignored as he did it as well, as the once god rushed to the heart chamber, aiming to do something inside. Savos openly cackled as he was bowled over by a sudden punch of the now visible automaton, the massive creation glaring down at the false god with hateful purple eyes. But even now he refused to leave his post. Even as Vivek attacked him and threw magic at him, the automaton took not a single step forward or backward, staying firmly planted in the place he was commanded to guard and deflecting all attacks without concerning himself with damage. Vivek grew more frantic, screaming, "A curse upon you, Azura!" as he stabbed his sword into one of Akulakon's eyes, getting thrown back and his neck nearly broken by the countering punch and earning a large gash in his chest from the automaton's massive glaive. Savos grinned as his spell completed, and the final third of the tribunal barely had the time to dodge to the side as a horizontal storm of bluish-purple flames passed him by, leaving him one arm and 1 foot lighter. With a snarl on his lips, the false prophet stabbed his sword into the dirt and spoke, "Heed our pact, Mola." His words were cut off by a loud thud as his brain was crushed by a one-handed hammer slamming into it from behind, the sound ringing out with an odd finality. Savos rapidly blinked the stars from his eyes as he looked up at the newcomer. The tall and well-built by even human standards elf armored in Dwemer armor and holding a hammer of similar make grinned down at the now very dead Vivek. Finally got the bastard. Now that he had a moment to truly observe him, Savos could make out numerous scars on his body that itself looked like it had been carved from stone, though the oddest part of it all was the haircut which belonged in the Merethic era, a singular narrow line of hair grown tall like a plume. The newcomer secured the burned form of Masanor atop his shoulder and sheathed his hammer before looking down at Savos. "I am not too late, am I?" Before Savos could answer, both of them tensed as the entire mountain shuddered once more. Varan Sarano, Archmaster of the Redoran, paced impatiently within the chamber given to him by his Dre's hosts in Old Ebonheart. All of the househeads, save for the Indoril, who were yet to elect their own, were present in the island city as the Grand Army of Morrowind assembled. Future military operations were not the cause of his nervous movements, however, but the shuddering mountaintop in the distance. He knew all he could do now was have faith, and the thought of not relying on himself terrified the old warrior. Rapid knocking drew him from his thoughts, and the doors were opened without waiting for his leave, revealing Archmagister Baladas Demnevani. "Sarano, come with me quickly, something is happening." The Archmaster frowned, but still followed his peer, and soon all four of them were gathered atop a northern balcony, staring straight at Red Mountain with their guts in their throats. "I feel it," Demnevani muttered. "The culmination approaches." No one felt like correcting the Archmage, so all they did was watch patiently. And then it happened. The top of the mountain spewed red energy that was not fire, rapidly consuming the entirety of Vardenfell before stopping at the edges of the inner sea and retreating to the mountaintop, quickly followed by an unnatural slurping noise in the back of everyone's head, as before their very eyes all the ash they could see covering the island was dragged back into the mountain, soon followed by the smoke above. Anaris Dres openly gaped. "What the f—" Once more the mountain shuddered, and once more it belched out power. All of the lords and ladies tensed, but what came out was neither destruction nor another wave of consumption, but a wave of faint, vibrant green. A wave of green that went beyond the inner sea and soon reached their little unassuming balcony. Varan Serrano had never tasted air so majestically pure in his life, not even in the lands of the Nords that were famous for it. He could hear the Dres finish her curse. He could hear Demnevani muttering about absolute impossibilities and ridiculous monsters. And he could both hear and see as Sadras Sindrel, the oldest non-Telvanni elf present, knelt on the ground and wept. The Archmaster understood the implications of what just happened and the inevitable loss of absolute influence now awaiting his house. He found that he did not mind all that much. It was almost relieving. Back within what was once the heart chamber of the heart of Lorcan, the infinitely compressed, cleansed ashes now congealed into one point, causing a much smaller shudder of power to pass through the vast cave. In the next instant a tree sprouted, its bark a flowing grey and its leaves a bright fiery red. And at the base of this bark was an opening, like a door leading into a small room. Within was only darkness, and swirling shadow and silence. The shadows stilled, and two red eyes aglow with power snapped open, soon followed by a bout of deep ecstatic laughter that echoed throughout the mountain and beyond.